My son's wife banned me from seeing my grandkids for 2 years. Then I stopped paying for their daycare. When my daughter-in-law told me I was no longer a positive influence on my grandchildren, I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply smiled, walked to my car, and made one phone call. By the end of the month, their $2,400 daycare bill came due with no one to pay it. And that was just the beginning of what they were about to lose. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I remember the exact moment I became a grandfather. March 14th, 2019, 3:47 in the morning. St. Joseph's Hospital in Tacoma. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. The smell of antiseptic mixing with something sweeter. New life, maybe. Or just hope wearing a hospital gown. My son Kevin placed that tiny bundle in my arms, and I felt something crack open in my chest. Not break, crack open, like a seed finally finding sunlight after years underground. "Dad, meet Emma," he whispered, his voice thick with exhaustion and wonder. "Emma, meet your grandpa." She weighed 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Her fingers were smaller than my thumbnail, and when she wrapped one of those impossible fingers around my pinky, I made a silent promise to whatever God was listening. I would give this child everything. Everything I had. Everything I was. I kept that promise. For 5 years, I kept it religiously. My name is Robert Chen. I'm 64 years old, retired after 31 years as a civil engineer for the Washington State Department of Transportation. I designed bridges. Real ones, the kind that carry thousands of people safely across rivers and valleys every single day. I mention this not to brag, but because it matters later. I spent my career building connections, making sure structures could bear weight without collapsing. I thought I understood something about foundations. I was wrong. After my wife Linda passed in 2017, ovarian cancer, diagnosed too late, gone in 11 months, I rattled around our house in Federal Way like a marble in an empty jar. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a backyard with a vegetable garden Linda had loved and I couldn't bear to look at. Too much space, too much silence. Kevin's phone calls kept me breathing. Sunday dinners at his apartment in Tacoma gave me reasons to shower, to shave, to pretend I was still a person and not just grief wearing human skin. When he told me Rachel was pregnant, I cried for the first time since the funeral. Happy tears, he assured me later when I apologized for the display. Dad, they were happy tears. They were. Mostly. Rachel had entered Kevin's life 2 years before Emma arrived. She was pretty in a sharp-edged way, high cheekbones, careful makeup, the kind of posture that suggested years of ballet, or perhaps just years of looking down at people. She worked in marketing for a tech startup in Seattle, which meant she used words like synergy and leverage in casual conversation and checked her phone during dinner like it contained the nuclear codes. I tried to like her. I did. For Kevin's sake, I smiled through brunches where she corrected my pronunciation of quinoa. I nodded politely when she explained that my retirement portfolio was suboptimal and I really should speak to her financial advisor. I bit my tongue when she redecorated Kevin's apartment in shades of gray so aggressive they made the place look like a waiting room for purgatory. "She's just particular," Kevin said once, after Rachel had sent back a bottle of wine at dinner, the 3rd restaurant that month where something wasn't quite up to her standards. She knows what she wants. What she wanted, I learned slowly, was everything. The daycare issue started innocuously enough. Emma was 18 months old. Rachel was desperate to return to work. And the waiting lists at Seattle's acceptable facilities stretched longer than my driveway. We found a spot at Bright Horizons in Bellevue, Kevin told me over the phone, his voice carrying that particular strain I'd come to recognize as Rachel-influenced stress. "It's perfect. Montessori-inspired curriculum, organic snacks, a 4-to-1 student-teacher ratio." "That sounds wonderful," I said, meaning it. "How much?" A pause. The kind of pause that costs money. $2,400 a month. I nearly choked on my coffee. $2,400? For daycare? I know, Dad. I know. But Rachel toured 7 facilities and this is the only one that meets her standards. They have a music enrichment program and Mandarin immersion starting at age 2 and... Kevin. I stopped him gently. Can you afford this? Another pause, longer this time. We're figuring it out. Rachel's salary is good, but the startup hasn't given raises in 2 years, and my teaching position at the community college doesn't exactly. I'll pay for it. The words came out before I'd fully considered them, but even as they hung in the air between us, I knew I meant them. My pension was solid. Linda's life insurance had been generous. The house was paid off. What was I saving for, exactly? Another 30 years of eating dinner alone and watching bridges I designed carry strangers to places I'd never go. Dad, I can't ask you to. You didn't ask. I offered. Consider it my gift to Emma. Every child deserves the best start possible. I could hear the relief flooding through the phone line, warm and immediate. Dad, thank you. Seriously. Rachel's going to be so grateful. Rachel's gratitude, as it turned out, had an expiration date. The first payment went through on April 1, 2020, the same week the world shut down and nothing made sense anymore. Emma stayed home for 7 months, while I paid for a spot she couldn't use. $16,800 for empty cubbies and unstacked blocks. I didn't complain. The facility needed the money to survive. My granddaughter would need somewhere to go when the world remembered how to breathe. By the time Emma finally returned to Bright Horizons in November, I'd established a rhythm. Auto-pay on the first of every month. $2,400 vanishing from my checking account as reliably as the sunrise. I also established something else. Grandpa Wednesdays. Every Wednesday afternoon, I drove 45 minutes from Federal Way to Bellevue, picked Emma up from daycare at 3:30, and spent 4 glorious hours being the grandfather I'd promised to be. We went to the park. We fed ducks at Maidenbower Bay. We built elaborate block towers in my living room and knocked them down with theatrical crashes that made her laugh until she hiccuped. Again, Grandpa. Again. I would have built and destroyed 1,000 towers for that laugh. Wednesday dinners became our thing. I learned to make the foods she loved. Buttered noodles, cut-up hot dogs, apple slices arranged into smiley faces on her plate. Sophisticated cuisine, it was not. But Emma ate every bite, and that was worth more than any Michelin star. I bought a car seat for my truck, then a high chair for my kitchen, then a toddler bed for the guest room, just in case she ever stayed overnight. The room that had been empty since Kevin moved out at 19, slowly filled with stuffed animals, picture books, and a nightlight shaped like a purple elephant that cast gentle shadows on walls that had known too much silence. "You're spoiling her," Rachel said once, surveying the toy collection that had accumulated in my living room. Her tone suggested this was not a compliment. "That's what grandparents are for," I replied, bouncing Emma on my knee. Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes. It rarely did. When the second grandchild arrived, baby Lucas, born October 3, 2022, 8 pounds even, I increased my contribution without being asked. The family daycare rate at Bright Horizons was $4,200 for both children. I rounded up to $4,500 to cover the endless activity fees and supply charges that appeared on statements like mushrooms after rain. $54,000 a year, more than some people's salaries. I told myself it was an investment in my grandchildren's futures. I told myself Linda would have wanted this. I told myself a lot of things that helped me sleep at night. What I didn't tell myself, what I refused to see, were the red flags waving frantically in my peripheral vision. Like the Thanksgiving of 2022, when Rachel seated me at the far end of the table, away from the children, because the kids are at a developmental stage where too much stimulation during meals causes behavioral issues. Like Christmas that same year, when my carefully chosen gifts, a wooden train set for Emma, a soft elephant rattle for Lucas, were quietly donated to Goodwill because we're trying to minimize plastic and overstimulation. The train set was handcrafted maple. The elephant was organic cotton. Neither contained a single piece of plastic. Like the Sunday dinner in February 2023 when Rachel announced they were restructuring family time, and perhaps monthly visits would be more sustainable than weekly ones. Monthly, I kept my voice steady, but my hands trembled around my water glass. I see Emma every Wednesday. We have our routine. Routines change, Robert. Rachel never called me dad, not once in 6 years. Children need consistency within their nuclear family unit. External influences, however well-meaning, can create confusion about attachment hierarchies. I looked at Kevin, waiting for him to say something. To defend our Wednesdays, To defend me. He stared at his plate like the answers were hidden in his mashed potatoes. Maybe we can discuss this later, he mumbled. After dinner. Later never came. The discussion never happened. And just like that, my weekly Wednesdays became monthly Saturdays, scheduled with the precision of dental appointments and carrying about as much warmth. Emma cried the first month. Where's Grandpa? I want Grandpa. Grandpa's busy, sweetheart, I heard Rachel say through the phone Kevin had accidentally left on speaker. He has his own life. We can't expect him to drop everything for us forever. I was sitting in my truck in their driveway when I heard it. I'd arrived early for my newly assigned second Saturday visit. The engine was off. The windows were cracked. And my granddaughter was being taught that I had abandoned her. I should have said something then. Should have marched inside and demanded to know why I was being painted as the villain while writing $4,500 checks every month. But I didn't. Because confrontation might mean less time with Emma and Lucas. Because Kevin's silence scared me more than Rachel's words. Because somewhere along the way, I'd started believing that access to my grandchildren was a privilege that could be revoked, not a relationship I'd earned through years of sacrifice and presence and love. So I swallowed my pride, plastered on a smile, and knocked on the door like a salesman hoping to be let inside. The final red flag came on a Wednesday in September 2023. Not my Wednesday. Those had been gone for 7 months by then, but a Wednesday nonetheless. I was at the grocery store, loading my cart with the supplies for a pot roast I was planning to make for Sunday's visit, when my phone rang. The daycare's number. Mr. Chen? This is Director Williams at Bright Horizons. I'm calling because there's been an issue with this month's payment. The card on file was declined. I frowned. That's impossible. I have autopay set up. The payment's been going through for 3.5 years. I understand, sir. But the bank rejected the charge. Can you verify the payment information? I pulled up my banking app right there in the cereal aisle. And there it was, the $4,500 charge, attempted and failed. Not because of insufficient funds, I had plenty of those, but because the recurring payment had been canceled. Canceled on September 1st. By someone who wasn't me. Can you tell me? I said slowly. My voice surprisingly calm, considering my heart was hammering against my ribs, who has authorization to modify the payment arrangement. A pause. Papers shuffling. According to our records, Mrs. Rachel Chen was added as an authorized contact in July. She called last week to update the billing information. The charges are now going to a different card. Different card. I thanked Director Williams, hung up, and stood motionless in the cereal aisle for a full minute, canned goods and cornflakes swimming in my vision. Rachel had removed me from the daycare payments. After 3.5 years and over $150,000, she had simply cut me out. No conversation, no warning, no thank you. Just a phone call to a billing department, and suddenly the money I'd been providing was no longer welcome, or needed, or acknowledged. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. Hey Dad, slight change of plans. Sunday doesn't work anymore. Maybe next month. I stared at those words until they blurred. Maybe next month. And somewhere in the fluorescent hell of aisle 7, between the Cheerios and the Lucky Charms, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not crack open this time. Crack closed. I put back the pot roast supplies. I wouldn't be needing them after all. The drive home from the grocery store took 47 minutes. I know because I watched every single one of them tick by on the dashboard clock, my mind running calculations that had nothing to do with traffic patterns. $4,500 per month. 42 months of payments. $189,000. Plus the extras I'd covered along the way. The emergency appendectomy when Kevin's insurance had a $6,000 deductible. The new transmission for Rachel's Lexus when it died 3 days before Christmas. The loan for their down payment on the house in Kirkland. $35,000 I'd pulled from my retirement account and never seen again. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I tallied up a number that made my hands shake against the steering wheel. $247,000. $250,000, given freely and never once acknowledged. And now, without so much as a phone call, I'd been erased from the equation entirely. I sat in my truck until the engine cooled and the October chill crept through the windows. The house looked different somehow. Smaller. Emptier. Like it knew something I was only beginning to understand. I didn't call Kevin that night. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I did something I should have done years ago. I started keeping records. My home office hadn't seen much use since retirement. Linda's watercolors still hung on the walls, soft landscapes of places we planned to visit together and never did. Her desk sat in the corner, untouched, her reading glasses still resting on a stack of novels she'd never finish. I'd kept the room exactly as she left it, a shrine to a future that cancer had stolen. But my desk was clear, and my filing cabinet was organized, and somewhere in those metal drawers were 5 years of bank statements I'd been too busy, or too willfully blind, to examine closely. I pulled them out, one folder at a time, and spread them across the desk like an archaeologist uncovering bones. The daycare payments were easy to track, consistent, reliable. $2,400 becoming $4,500, month after month, a river of money flowing in one direction. But it was the other charges that made my stomach turn. March 2021, $3,200 to help with property taxes that were apparently higher than expected. August 2021, $1,800 for Emma's medical specialist that insurance didn't cover. I'd never asked what kind of specialist, never thought to question it. December 2021, $5,000 for Christmas expenses because Rachel wanted the children to have a magical holiday experience. I'd spent that Christmas alone, eating leftover turkey and watching It's a Wonderful Life on mute. The pattern continued through 2022 and 2023. Every few months, another request, another emergency, another small favor that added up to a financial hemorrhage I'd somehow failed to notice while it was happening. But it was the most recent statements, July, August, September 2023, that stopped me cold. 3 deposits into my checking account, each one exactly $2,000. Each one from the same source, Venmo transfer from Kevin Chen. I stared at those entries, trying to make them make sense. Kevin had been sending me money. I grabbed my phone and opened the Venmo app I downloaded years ago and never really learned to use. There they were, 3 payments, 3 identical notes. Thanks, Dad, for everything. I hadn't noticed the deposits because I rarely checked my statements anymore. The pension came in, the bills went out, and as long as the numbers stayed positive, I'd stopped paying attention. But Kevin had been quietly returning money, $6,000 over 3 months, while his wife was simultaneously cutting me out of their children's lives. Why? The question burrowed into my brain and wouldn't leave. I broke my silence the next morning. Not with Kevin. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but with someone who'd known my son longer than Rachel had. Marcus Webb had been Kevin's best friend since middle school. They'd played basketball together, gotten detention together, stood as best men at each other's weddings. If anyone understood what was happening in Kevin's marriage, it would be Marcus. Mr. Chen. His voice was warm through the phone, the same booming enthusiasm I remembered from backyard barbecues and graduation parties. It's been ages. How are you doing? I've been better, Marcus. I was hoping we could talk in person, if you have time. A pause. Is everything okay? Is Kevin? Kevin's fine. Physically. I need to understand some things, and I think you might be able to help. We met at a coffee shop in Auburn, neutral territory between Federal Way and the Seattle suburbs where Marcus worked in software development. He'd aged well, still had most of his hair, still carried himself like the athlete he'd once been, but there were new lines around his eyes that suggested life hadn't been entirely kind. I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Chen. Marcus wrapped his hands around his latte, not meeting my eyes. I'm not sure how much I should say. Kevin and I, we're not as close as we used to be. Since when? Since Rachel. The name hung between us like smoke. She doesn't like me much, Marcus continued. I made the mistake of questioning some of her decisions early on. Suggested maybe Kevin should stand up for himself more. She didn't appreciate the feedback. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Last time I saw Kevin alone was his birthday in June. We grabbed beers and he spent half the night apologizing for not being around more. Said Rachel thought I was a negative influence on their family dynamic. A negative influence. The same word she'd used about me. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. He finally looked up. Shoot. Has Kevin ever talked to you about money problems? Real problems, not just the normal stress of raising kids. Marcus shifted in his seat, Mr. Chen. Please. A long exhale. Yeah, he has. About 6 months ago, he called me in the middle of the night. Totally panicked. Said Rachel had maxed out 3 credit cards without telling him. We're talking close to $40,000 in debt that he didn't even know existed. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. $40,000. On what? Clothes, mostly. Some jewelry. A membership to some exclusive gym in Bellevue that costs $500 a month. Oh, and investments. Marcus made air quotes with his fingers. Rachel got into day trading last year. She was convinced she'd discovered some system for predicting the market. Kevin said she lost about $15,000 before he found out and made her stop. I thought about the new Lexus. The designer bags I'd noticed in photos on Rachel's Instagram. The kitchen renovation they'd done last spring that featured appliances I couldn't pronounce, and countertops that cost more per square foot than my first car. Does Kevin's salary cover their expenses? Marcus shook his head. Not even close. Community college adjuncts don't exactly rake it in, and Rachel's startup has been restructuring for 2 years. Her commission checks are barely covering her car payment. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. Kevin told me he's been trying to get things under control, cutting expenses where he can. He mentioned something about finally standing up to you. Standing up to me. His words, not mine. Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable now. He said, Rachel convinced him that your financial help was enabling their bad habits, that the only way they'd learn to be financially responsible was if you stopped rescuing them. I sat very still, processing this information. Rachel had convinced Kevin that cutting me off was about responsibility, about tough love, about breaking an unhealthy cycle of dependence. And Kevin, my sweet, conflict-averse son who'd spent his whole life trying to keep everyone happy, had believed her. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. Something Kevin made me promise not to tell anyone. But you're his father, and I think you need to know. Tell me. They're behind on their mortgage. 3 months, as of last week. Kevin's been sending you money because he felt guilty about cutting you off, but he can't afford to do both, pay you back and keep up with their bills. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping. Mr. Chen, I think Rachel is planning something. Kevin mentioned she'd been talking to her parents about options, and every time Rachel's parents get involved, Kevin ends up in a worse position than before. Rachel's parents, Theodore and Margot Ashford, old money from Mercer Island, who'd looked at my son like he was something scraped off the bottom of their boat shoes from the day they met him. What kind of options? I asked. Marcus shrugged. I don't know, but Kevin was scared when he told me about it. Really scared. I thanked Marcus for his honesty and drove home with my mind racing faster than my truck's engine. That night, I did something I'm not particularly proud of. I logged into the family phone plan I still paid for, another $180 monthly expense I'd somehow failed to cancel, and pulled up the usage records for Kevin's number. Not the content of his messages, just the data, the numbers he'd called, the frequency of contact. 3 weeks of records painted a troubling picture. Kevin called Rachel's parents almost daily, sometimes multiple times a day. Conversations lasting 15, 20, 30 minutes. He called me twice in those 3 weeks, both times under 2 minutes, quick check-ins that had felt distracted even at the time. But it was the third number that caught my attention. A local 206 area code that appeared 17 times in the past week alone. Each conversation between 5 and 10 minutes. I ran the number through a reverse lookup site. Sterling and Associates, Family Law, Seattle, Washington. A divorce attorney. I stared at the screen for a long time, not quite believing what I was seeing. Kevin was talking to a divorce lawyer. My son, who'd spent 6 years bending himself into whatever shape Rachel demanded, who'd defended her every decision even when it meant sacrificing his relationship with his own father. He was finally considering an exit. But why now? And more importantly, whose side was the lawyer on? I grabbed a pad of paper and started making notes. The credit card debt, the failed day trading, the 3 months of missed mortgage payments, Rachel's spending habits, her parents' involvement, the systematic way I'd been removed from my grandchildren's lives. By midnight, I had 3 pages of observations and one inescapable conclusion. This wasn't about teaching Kevin financial responsibility. This wasn't about attachment hierarchies or external influences, or any of Rachel's clinical buzzwords. This was about control. Rachel was isolating Kevin. From his friends, from his father, from anyone who might notice that something was deeply wrong. And her parents were helping, probably with promises of financial bailouts that came with strings attached. Strings like custody, strings like their daughter's reputation, strings like making sure their grandchildren grew up Ashford, not Chen. I looked at the family photos on my office wall. Kevin at his graduation, beaming beside me. Kevin holding Emma for the first time, tears on his cheeks. Kevin and Marcus with their arms around each other at Kevin's wedding, before Rachel had systematically dismantled every friendship her husband had ever made. My son was drowning, and he'd pushed away the only lifeline that came without conditions. I picked up my phone and dialed Kevin's number. It was past midnight, but I didn't care. 4 rings. 5. Then voicemail. Kevin, it's Dad. We need to talk. Not about money, not about visits, about what's actually going on. I know about the credit cards. I know about the mortgage. And I know you've been talking to a divorce lawyer. I paused, weighing my next words carefully. I'm not angry. I'm scared for you. Call me back, please. I hung up and waited. My phone stayed silent. The response came 3 days later, but not from Kevin. I was raking leaves in my backyard, therapy in motion, Linda used to call yard work, when a silver Mercedes pulled into my driveway. I recognized it immediately. Theodore Ashford's car, the one he'd made a point of mentioning, cost more than my annual pension. I set down my rake and waited. Theodore emerged first, all silver hair and golf tan and the practiced smile of a man who'd spent 60 years getting whatever he wanted. Margot followed, clutching her designer purse like a shield, her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. Robert. Theodore extended his hand as if we were business associates meeting for lunch. We need to have a conversation. Then talk. His smile flickered at my tone. He wasn't used to being spoken to without the usual social lubrication. Perhaps we could go inside. This is a delicate matter. The porch is fine. We settled into the chairs I'd bought last spring. Another small luxury I'd allowed myself once the daycare payments stopped draining my account. Theodore looked at the peeling paint on my railings, the cracked concrete of my steps, and I could see him calculating, adjusting his assessment of my net worth. I'll be direct, he said, crossing his legs. We're aware that you've been interfering with Kevin and Rachel's financial arrangements. Interfering. The daycare situation. The questions you've been asking. The messages you've been leaving. Theodore's smile hardened. We know about all of it, Robert, and we think it would be best for everyone if you step back. Step back from what, exactly? Margot spoke for the first time. From our grandchildren. From Kevin's marriage. From matters that don't concern you. I looked at her, really looked, and saw something I'd missed in all our previous encounters. Fear. Margot Ashford was afraid. Where's Kevin? I asked. Theodore waved dismissively. Kevin is at home with the children. Rachel felt it was better if we handled this conversation directly. Rachel felt. I repeated the words slowly. And what does Kevin feel? Kevin understands that this family needs to present a united front. There are challenges ahead. Changes that will require everyone's cooperation. Theodore leaned forward, his voice dropping into what he probably considered a fatherly tone. We're prepared to make this easy for you, Robert. A clean break, no drama. You walk away now, and we'll ensure you receive regular photos of the children, birthday cards, holiday updates. You can be a grandparent from a comfortable distance. And if I don't agree? The mask slipped for just a moment. Something cold flickered in Theodore's eyes. Then we'll be forced to discuss your mental fitness, your history of obsessive behavior, the way you've been stalking your former daughter-in-law and attempting to turn your son against his own wife. He spread his hands. We have resources, Robert, lawyers, therapists, people who can testify to concerns about your psychological state. It would be unpleasant for everyone, especially the children. There it was, the threat wrapped in silk. Play along, or be destroyed. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 64 years in my knees, my back, my heart. Theodore, I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I've spent $250,000 supporting your daughter and my son. I've been a present, loving grandfather for 5 years. And now you're sitting on my porch, threatening to paint me as mentally unstable, because I asked why I was being cut off from my own family. Now, Robert, I'm not finished. I stepped closer, watching him shrink back almost imperceptibly. You can call your lawyers. You can hire your therapists. You can plant whatever stories you want about the crazy old man who couldn't let go. But I know what's actually happening in that house. The debt, the spending, the isolation, and I know that Kevin is looking for a way out. Margot's sharp intake of breath confirmed what I'd suspected. They knew about the divorce lawyer. That's why they were here. Not to protect Rachel's marriage. To protect their investment in it. Stay away from my son, Theodore said, standing abruptly. Stay away from our daughter. And stay away from those children. Or what? He didn't answer. He just took Margot's arm and walked back to his Mercedes, each step radiating the kind of fury that only comes from being outmaneuvered. I watched them drive away, the silver car disappearing around the corner of my quiet suburban street. Then I went inside, pulled out my laptop, and started researching grandparents' rights in Washington state. They wanted a war. I'd give them one. Orchestrated narrative escalation with multiple plot revelations. This is a good part too. I've introduced the financial scope of Robert's contributions. $247,000. Marcus as the witness/catalyst character. The revelation about Rachel's secret debt and spending. Kevin's secret Venmo payments, showing guilt. The divorce lawyer discovery. The confrontation with Theodore and Margot. The threat from Rachel's parents. Robert's decision to fight back. The cliffhanger is clear. Theodore and Margot have threatened him, and Robert is now preparing for legal battle. Now I need to add the progress divider. Washington state, I learned during 3 sleepless nights of research, was not particularly friendly to grandparents. The law was clear. Grandparents had no automatic right to visitation. To even petition the court, I'd need to prove that Kevin and Rachel were unfit parents, a nearly impossible bar, or that denying me access would cause demonstrable harm to the children. The fact that I'd financially supported those children for 5 years? Irrelevant. The fact that I'd been a consistent presence in their lives? Legally meaningless. The fact that I loved Emma and Lucas more than my next breath. Courts didn't factor in broken hearts. I closed my laptop at 3:47 a.m. on Thursday morning and stared at the ceiling of my dark bedroom. The digital clock cast red shadows across Linda's side of the bed. Still her side, even after 6 years. I hadn't been able to sleep in the middle. What would you do? I asked the empty room. Linda had always been the practical one, the planner, the one who could see through bullshit with a single raised eyebrow. She would have spotted Rachel years ago, would have warned Kevin, would have found some way to protect our son from his own desperate need to be loved. But Linda was gone, and I'd failed to be her substitute. I got up, made coffee, and called the first family law attorney who opened at 8 a.m. Gerald Patterson had an office in downtown Tacoma, wedged between a bail bonds agency and a Vietnamese restaurant that made the entire building smell like pho. Not exactly prestigious surroundings, but his reviews were solid and his consultation fee was reasonable. $150 for the first hour, which he warned me would likely be the most expensive hour of my life. Grandparents' rights cases are heartbreakers, he said, settling behind a desk cluttered with case files and family photos. His own grandchildren, I assumed, judging by the finger paintings taped to his bookshelf. I won't lie to you, Mr. Chen. The odds aren't in your favor. I understand that. Do you? He leaned forward, studying me with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many families tear themselves apart. Because most people walk in here thinking the law cares about what's fair. It doesn't. The law cares about parental rights, and unless those parents are actively harming their children, the court will almost always side with them. Even if they're cutting off a grandparent who's been financially supporting the family for years. Especially then. Gerald shook his head. The money makes it worse, actually. A judge might see your contributions as evidence of an unhealthy dynamic. You using financial leverage to maintain access. Rachel's lawyer would argue that you were essentially paying for the privilege of seeing your grandchildren. And now that the payments have stopped, you're retaliating. The word hit like a slap. I'm not retaliating. I just want to understand what happened. I know that. You know that. But perception matters in family court, and right now, the perception isn't good. Gerald pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. I talked for 47 minutes straight. The daycare payments, The loans, the gradual exclusion, Marcus's revelations about the debt, the Ashfords' visit and their thinly veiled threats.
By the time I finished, Gerald had filled 3 pages with notes, and his expression had shifted from professional skepticism to something closer to genuine concern. "This is more complicated than I initially thought," he said slowly. "The Ashfords have resources. Old money. Mercer Island."
Theodore was something in venture capital before he retired. "And they're actively involved in your son's marriage? Actively involved in destroying it, from what I can tell." Gerald set down his pen. "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there any chance at all, that your son actually wants you out of his life? That this isn't about Rachel or her parents, but about Kevin's genuine wishes?" The question carved a hole in my chest. "I don't know," I admitted. 6 months ago, I would have said absolutely not. Now, I'm not sure I know my son anymore." Gerald nodded, unsurprised. "Then, before we talk about legal strategies, I think you need to find out. Talk to Kevin directly. Not through Rachel, not through her parents. Face to face, just the 2 of you. Find out where he actually stands. And if he says he wants me gone, then we're done." Gerald's voice was gentle but firm. "I don't take cases where a parent clearly wants to limit contact. Even if Rachel is the driving force, if Kevin is willing to go along with it, there's nothing I can do." I left his office with a business card in my pocket and a weight in my stomach that no amount of coffee could dissolve. Getting Kevin alone proved harder than I expected. I tried calling. Voicemail. I tried texting. Read receipts showed he'd seen my messages, but no response came. I drove to their house in Kirkland on a Saturday afternoon, hoping to catch him in the yard or the driveway, some neutral space where we could talk without Rachel hovering. But the curtains were drawn, the cars were gone, and the house had the empty feeling of a place deliberately abandoned. Sunday morning, I tried the community college where Kevin taught Introduction to English Literature and Advanced Composition. The fall semester was in session. Surely he'd be in his office during posted hours. The department secretary, a cheerful woman named Dolores who remembered me from Kevin's graduation ceremony, looked uncomfortable when I asked for him. "Mr. Chen, Kevin isn't here today. Is he sick?" Dolores glanced around the empty hallway, then lowered her voice. "He took a leave of absence. 3 weeks ago. Personal reasons." She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you're his father, and honestly, I've been worried about him. He didn't look good the last time I saw him. Lost weight, bags under his eyes. Asked me twice if anyone had been calling about him. Anyone like who? He didn't say. But he seemed scared, Mr. Chen. Really scared." I thanked Dolores and walked back to my truck, my mind spinning with this new information. Kevin had taken a leave of absence. Kevin was scared. Kevin was hiding. But from what? Or from whom? The answer came 2 days later, delivered by certified mail in an envelope thick enough to choke on. Chen Family Trust. Statement of account. I didn't recognize the sender. Chen Family Trust. I'd never established any such thing. But there was my name on the envelope, my address, and a return receipt requiring my signature. Inside, I found 16 pages of financial documents that made my blood run cold. The trust had been established in 2021, according to the paperwork, with me listed as the primary beneficiary and Kevin Chen as the trustee. Assets included my house, the home I'd shared with Linda for 32 years, along with my pension disbursements, my savings accounts, and a life insurance policy I'd completely forgotten I still had. Total value, $847,000. I read the documents 3 times, certain I was missing something. I had never agreed to create a trust. I had never signed over control of my assets to anyone. And yet here were pages of legal language describing exactly that, complete with what appeared to be my signature on every relevant line. Except the signatures weren't mine. They were close. Someone had clearly practiced. But the R in Robert swooped the wrong direction, and the C in Chen had a loop I'd never once made in 64 years of signing my name. Someone had forged my signature. Someone had created a fraudulent trust. Someone had laid the groundwork to take everything I owned. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, the documents spreading around me like evidence at a crime scene. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the pages steady. The trust listed Kevin as trustee, but Kevin couldn't have done this alone.
He didn't have access to my financial information, didn't know the details of my accounts, wouldn't have known about the life insurance policy I'd purchased back when he was still in elementary school.
Someone with financial expertise had helped him, or someone with financial expertise had used his name. I flipped to the final page of the document, searching for any additional information.
And there, at the bottom, in the space reserved for the preparing attorney, I found a name that made everything suddenly horribly clear. Prepared by Ashford Capital Management, LLC, Theodore R. Ashford, Managing Partner. The pieces fell into place with the sickening click of a trap snapping shut.
Theodore Ashford hadn't come to my house to threaten me. He'd come to assess whether I'd discovered his scheme.
The talk about mental fitness, about lawyers and therapists, about painting me as psychologically unstable, it wasn't a threat. It was a preview of their defense strategy. Because if I was mentally unfit, I couldn't manage my own finances. And if I couldn't manage my own finances, the trust would take over. And if the trust took over, Kevin, or more accurately, the Ashfords controlling Kevin, would have access to nearly $1 million of my assets.
The $247,000 I'd already given them wasn't enough. They wanted everything. I pulled out my phone and started photographing every page of the document, my hand steadier now that shock had given way to cold, focused rage.
Then I called Gerald Patterson's office.
"I need to see you today. It's urgent. Mr. Chen, I'm in court until someone forged my signature and created a fraudulent trust transferring my assets to my son.
My former daughter-in-law's father is behind it.
I have the documents in front of me." A long pause. "Can you be here at 4:30? I'll be there at 4. Gerald Patterson looked 10 years older by the time he finished reviewing the trust documents.
He'd called in a colleague, a woman named Sandra Okonkwo, who specialized in elder financial abuse, and together they'd spent 2 hours dissecting every page, every signature, every legal clause that had been twisted to facilitate stealing my life's savings.
"This is sophisticated," Sandra said finally, setting down the last page. "Whoever prepared this knew exactly what they were doing. The trust structure is designed to look legitimate at first glance. You'd need an expert to spot the irregularities.
And the forged signatures are good. Not perfect, but good enough to fool a notary who wasn't paying close attention.
Can we prove Theodore Ashford did this? His company's name is on the preparation line," Gerald said. "That's a start."
But he'll claim Kevin brought the documents to him already completed, that he was just providing a service for his son-in-law, that he had no reason to suspect forgery. Plausible deniability, Sandra added. These people plan ahead. I thought about Theodore's calm demeanor on my porch, his rehearsed threats, his absolute certainty that he was in control. What about Kevin?
If he's listed as trustee, doesn't that implicate him? Gerald and Sandra exchanged a look. "That's where it gets complicated," Gerald said carefully. "If Kevin knowingly participated in creating a fraudulent trust, he's committed multiple felonies."
But if he was manipulated, if Rachel or her parents pressured him into signing documents he didn't fully understand, he might be as much a victim as you are. How do we find out which one it is? We ask him. Sandra folded her hands on the desk.
"Mr. Chen, this has moved beyond grandparents' rights. This is potential elder financial abuse, forgery, and fraud.
We need to involve law enforcement. But before we do that, we need to know whether your son is a perpetrator or a pawn." I stared at the trust documents, 16 pages of betrayal, legal language carefully constructed to separate me from everything I'd worked my entire life to build.
"There's something else," I said slowly, a memory surfacing through the fog of the past few hours. "Kevin's been sending me money. $2,000 a month for the past 3 months. Through Venmo." Gerald's eyebrows rose.
"He's been paying you back."
That's what I thought at first. But now I'm wondering. I pulled up the Venmo app on my phone, showing them the transactions. What if he was creating a paper trail? What if someone told him that paying me back would make the trust look more legitimate, like I was voluntarily transferring assets in exchange for regular payments? Sandra's expression hardened.
That's exactly the kind of manipulation we see in these cases.
Make the victim complicit, create documentation that muddies the waters, build a narrative that's hard to disprove. So Kevin might not know what the payments were actually for. He might know exactly what they're for, Gerald countered.
Or he might have been told a convenient lie that let him sleep at night. Either way, we need to find out. I nodded, decision crystallizing in my chest. Then that's what I'll do. I'll find Kevin and get him to talk to me.
Face to face, no lawyers, no Rachel, just a father and his son. And if he refuses? I thought about Emma's laugh, Lucas's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, the nursery I'd built in my guest room, slowly filling with toys for grandchildren I might never see again. Then I'll have my answer, I said.
And I'll know exactly how far I'm willing to go. I found Kevin at 7:43 the next morning, sitting alone in a booth at Denny's in Federal Way. It wasn't luck. After leaving Gerald's office, I'd driven past every place Kevin used to go before Rachel had reshaped his life. The basketball court where he and Marcus used to play pickup games, the library where he'd studied for his graduate exams, the diner where he'd worked summers in high school. Nothing. Then I remembered, the Denny's on Pacific Highway. Kevin had taken me there for breakfast on Father's Day, years ago, joking that it was our fancy tradition, because Linda had always cooked at home. We'd ordered grand slams and talked about nothing important, and he'd picked up the check with the first real money he'd ever earned. It was a long shot, but long shots were all I had left. I'd been parked in the lot for 6 hours when his car pulled in. An old Honda Civic, not the Lexus SUV Rachel usually drove. He was alone, wearing sweatpants and a faded Gonzaga sweatshirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I waited until he was seated before walking inside. "Hi, Kevin." His head snapped up, coffee sloshing over the rim of his cup. For a moment, I saw pure terror flash across his face. The kind of fear that comes from being hunted. Then he saw it was me, and the terror shifted to something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "Dad." His voice cracked on the word. "How did you find me?" I remembered. I slid into the booth across from him, studying the son I'd raised. Up close, the damage was even more apparent. His cheeks were hollow, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling around his coffee cup. This wasn't the confident young man who placed Emma in my arms 5 years ago. This was someone barely holding himself together. "We need to talk," I said. "Dad, I can't. Rachel's not here. Her parents aren't here. It's just us." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his shaking fingers. "Tell me what's happening, Kevin. Tell me the truth." For a long moment, he just stared at me, some internal battle playing out behind his exhausted eyes. Then his face crumpled, and my son started to cry. "I didn't know," he whispered. "Dad, I swear to God, I didn't know what they were really doing." By the time I figured it out, it was too late. Didn't know what? He pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket and slid it across the table. "They're not just taking your money, Dad. They're taking mine, too. The house, my salary, everything." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And if I try to leave, they're going to take the kids." I opened the envelope and found myself staring at custody paperwork. Already filed, already assigned a case number, already listing Rachel Ashford Chen as the primary petitioner, seeking sole custody of Emma Marie Chen and Lucas Robert Chen, on grounds of the father's documented mental instability and financial irresponsibility. The paperwork was dated 3 weeks ago, before Kevin took his leave of absence, before the Ashfords came to my house, before any of us knew a war had already begun. Kevin talked for 2 hours. The waitress refilled our coffee cups 3 times, shooting curious glances at the middle-aged man crying into his scrambled eggs and the older man listening with the kind of stillness that suggested something terrible was being confessed. She didn't interrupt. Maybe she'd seen enough of life to know when people needed to be left alone with their wreckage. "It started before the wedding," Kevin said, his voice hoarse from talking and crying and the sheer exhaustion of finally telling the truth. "I didn't see it then. I was so in love with Rachel, so desperate to be part of a family like hers. Successful, confident, people who belonged somewhere. I thought marrying her meant I'd finally be enough." "Enough for what?" He laughed bitterly. "Enough to stop feeling like the poor kid with the immigrant parents. Enough to prove I'd made something of myself. Enough to matter." He met my eyes for the first time. "I know that sounds pathetic. I know you and Mom gave me everything." But there was always this voice in my head saying I needed more, needed to be more. And Rachel made that voice go quiet. At least at first. I thought about the boy I'd raised, sensitive, eager to please, desperate for approval from teachers and coaches and anyone who might validate his existence. I'd assumed he'd outgrown that insecurity. I'd been wrong. When did things change?
Gradually, Kevin wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like it was the only warm thing in the world. Little comments at first. My car wasn't nice enough for her friends to see.
My apartment wasn't in the right neighborhood. My salary was cute for a starter job. But we'd need real income eventually. He shook his head. I kept thinking I just needed to try harder, be better, and she'd be happy. But she wasn't. She was never going to be happy, Dad. I understand that now. He took a shaky breath. After Emma was born, the pressure got worse. Rachel needed a bigger house, needed to be in a better school district, needed to maintain a certain lifestyle, so her parents wouldn't be disappointed. And when I said we couldn't afford it, she said we could. Because you'd help. The words hung in the air between us. She told me you'd offered, Kevin continued. Said you'd called her while I was at work and volunteered to cover the daycare, help with the down payment, whatever we needed. She made it sound like it was your idea, like you were insisting, and I should just accept gracefully. I never called Rachel, not once. I know that now. His voice cracked. But I didn't know it then. And every time I tried to talk to you about the money, she'd already prepped me with what to say, how to phrase it, how to make it seem like we were doing you a favor by letting you contribute. I thought back to those early conversations, Kevin's carefully rehearsed explanations about daycare costs, his grateful acceptance of help he claimed to have never requested. All of it scripted, all of it managed by a woman I'd welcomed into my family. What about the trust? I pulled out the documents I'd been carrying since yesterday. Did you sign these? Kevin looked at the papers, and his face went gray. No, God, no. He grabbed the pages, scanning them with increasing horror. Dad, I'd never seen these documents before. This isn't my signature. It's close, but it's not right. The K looks wrong, and I know. Mine is forged too. He stared at me. They forged both of us. Theodore's company prepared the paperwork. The question is whether he did it alone or had help. Kevin was quiet for a long moment, something dark moving behind his eyes. There's someone else, he said finally. Someone I didn't want to tell you about because I thought you'd hate me. Who? Aunt Rosa's husband, Victor. The name hit me like a physical blow. Victor Mendez, married to my sister for 23 years. The man who'd helped me install Linda's garden fountain. Who'd spent every Thanksgiving at our table. Who'd held my hand at the funeral when I couldn't stop shaking. That's not possible. Dad, listen to me. Kevin leaned forward urgently. Victor works in estate planning. He has access to your financial information. You used his firm for Mom's life insurance paperwork, remember? He knows your signatures, your account numbers, everything someone would need to create convincing forgeries. I remembered. 3 years ago, after Linda's death, I'd needed help navigating the insurance claim. Victor had offered his services free of charge, family helping family. He'd photocopied dozens of my documents, collected signatures for affidavits and beneficiary forms, asked questions about accounts and assets that I'd answered without hesitation. Because he was family. Because I trusted him. Why? The word came out strangled. Why would Victor do this? Money. Kevin's voice was flat. Theodore brought him in about 18 months ago, offered him $50,000 to provide documentation and notarize the trust papers. Victor's firm has been struggling. Rosa mentioned something about bad investments, lawsuits, money problems. I guess Theodore made him an offer he couldn't refuse. $50,000. The price of my brother-in-law's loyalty. The cost of betraying a man who'd considered him family. How do you know all this? Kevin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a USB drive. Because I've been recording them for 6 months. The USB drive contained 47 audio files, ranging from 3 minutes to nearly 2 hours. Kevin had started recording in April, around the time he'd first discovered the extent of the credit card debt. He'd hidden his phone during family dinners at the Ashfords' mansion on Mercer Island, capturing conversations that laid bare the entire conspiracy with devastating clarity. We listened to 3 of them in my truck parked behind the Denny's, the morning sun casting long shadows across the dashboard. Recording 1. April 15th. Theodore's voice, smooth and confident. The trust is nearly finalized. Victor assures me the signatures will pass any standard examination. By this time next year, we'll have full control of Robert's assets. Rachel, laughing. Poor Kevin still thinks Dad is helping us out of the goodness of his heart. He has no idea he's been signing away his inheritance. Margot, disapproving. I still don't understand why we need the old man's money. We have plenty. Theodore, patient. Because it's not just about money, darling. It's about protection. If Kevin ever gets the backbone to leave our daughter, we need leverage. And what better leverage than controlling his father's entire estate? Recording 2, June 3rd. Rachel, angry. Kevin's asking questions about the daycare billing. He saw a statement that showed different numbers than what I told him. Theodore, handle it. Redirect his attention. You know how to manage him. Rachel, he's not as stupid as he used to be, Daddy. The guilt is getting to him. He keeps talking about wanting to pay Robert back. Theodore, then let him pay. A few thousand here and there will create a paper trail showing voluntary transactions. It actually helps our case. The Venmo payments. Kevin had been manipulated into creating evidence of a financial relationship that could be twisted to support the fraudulent trust. Recording 3, August 28th. Victor's voice, nervous. I don't feel good about this anymore. Ted. Robert's my brother-in-law. If this comes out. Theodore, cold. If this comes out, you'll be the one holding the bag. Your signature is on the notarization. Your firm prepared the supporting documents. I'm just a family friend who provided business advice. Victor, you're threatening me. Theodore, I'm reminding you of your position. You're in too deep to develop a conscience now. Finish what you started, collect your fee, and keep your mouth shut. Otherwise, I'll make sure Rosa finds out exactly how you funded your gambling problem. Silence. Then Victor, defeated. Fine. But this is the last thing I do for you. Theodore, satisfied. Of course it is. Until the next thing. I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking. Not with fear, but with a rage so intense it felt like fire in my veins. Victor had sold me out to cover gambling debts I hadn't known existed. Theodore had orchestrated the entire scheme with the cold precision of a man who'd spent his life manipulating money and people. And Rachel had been the honey trap. The smiling face that had drawn my son into a web designed to drain 2 generations of Chen men dry. There's more, Kevin said quietly. The custody filing. That's their endgame. If I try to fight the divorce, they'll use the trust documents to claim I was complicit in defrauding my own father. They'll paint me as mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, unfit to raise children. And if you don't fight, then I sign away custody, accept a minimal settlement, and disappear from Emma and Lucas's lives forever. His voice broke. Rachel told me last week. She said I could choose. Go quietly and maybe get supervised visits, or fight and lose everything. I looked at my son. Broken, exhausted, trapped in a nightmare created by people who were supposed to love him. Kevin, why didn't you come to me sooner? Because I was ashamed. Tears streamed down his face. Because I let this happen. Because every time I tried to push back, Rachel would threaten to take the kids. And I couldn't. I can't lose them, Dad. They're everything. They're the only thing that's kept me alive through this. I reached across the truck's console and pulled my son into an embrace he hadn't allowed in years. He sobbed against my shoulder like he had when he was 7 and broken his arm falling off his bike, like he had at Linda's funeral when the weight of grief finally crushed through his composure. We're going to fix this, I said, the words a promise I didn't yet know how to keep. I don't know how yet, but we're going to fix this. Together. We drove to Gerald Patterson's office together. Kevin was terrified of being seen, convinced that the Ashfords had people watching him, that Rachel would somehow know he'd betrayed her confidence. I told him it didn't matter. The moment he'd started recording those conversations, he'd made his choice. Now we had to see it through. Gerald listened to the first recording with his face carefully neutral. By the third, his professional mask had slipped into something approaching genuine shock. This is significant, he said finally, setting down the USB drive like it might bite him. You understand what you have here. Evidence, I said. More than evidence. This is a confession. Multiple confessions, recorded over months, detailing a conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, and potentially extortion. He looked at Kevin. Did any of them know you were recording? Kevin shook his head. Washington is a 2-party consent state. I know the recordings might not be admissible in criminal court. That's true. Gerald leaned back in his chair, thinking. But they're not useless either. Even if we can't use them directly, we can use the information in them to guide our investigation, to know exactly which documents to subpoena, which witnesses to depose.
And in a custody case, family court judges have more discretion than criminal judges about what they'll consider. So we have a chance. We have more than a chance. For the first time since I'd met him, Gerald Patterson smiled. We have a roadmap. Theodore Ashford just handed us his entire playbook, and he doesn't even know it. Sandra Okonkwo arrived 20 minutes later, having cleared her afternoon calendar the moment Gerald called her. Together, the four of us spent the next 3 hours building a case file that would have made a federal prosecutor jealous. The fraudulent trust, prepared by a licensed financial professional who could be subpoenaed. The forged signatures, which handwriting experts could analyze and authenticate. Victor Mendez's involvement, documented in his own voice, creating a direct link between the Ashford scheme and the technical execution. Rachel's custody filing, which now looked less like a legitimate concern and more like the final move in a long-planned checkmate. And threaded through all of it, 47 recordings that proved everything we claimed wasn't paranoia or speculation. It was a documented conspiracy that had been building for years. Here's what I recommend, Sandra said as the afternoon sun began to fade. We file a report with Adult Protective Services immediately. Elder financial abuse is taken seriously in Washington, especially when there's documentary evidence of this quality. That creates an official record and puts Theodore on notice that he's being watched. Won't that make them accelerate the custody case? Kevin asked. Possibly. But right now, they think they have the advantage. They don't know about the recordings, don't know Kevin has been documenting their conversations, don't know you two have connected. Sandra turned to me. Mr. Chen, I know this is difficult, but I need you to understand something. The next few weeks are going to be brutal. Theodore Ashford is going to fight with everything he has, not because he cares about winning, but because losing means potential criminal exposure. People like him don't go down easily. I'm not afraid of Theodore Ashford. You should be. Her voice was gentle but firm. He has money, connections, and no ethical constraints. He's already shown he's willing to forge documents and manipulate family members. There's no telling what else he'll do when he feels cornered. I thought about Emma's laugh. Lucas's tiny fingers wrapped around mine. The nursery that sat empty in my house, waiting for grandchildren I might never see again. Let him come, I said. I've spent 64 years building bridges that could handle any weight. I think I can handle one entitled sociopath who's never faced a consequence in his life. Gerald nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. We have a family to save. That night, Kevin stayed in my guest room for the first time since high school. I made pasta, nothing fancy, just spaghetti with meat sauce from a recipe Linda had taught me decades ago. We ate at the kitchen table, surrounded by the comfortable silence of two people too exhausted for conversation, but grateful not to be alone. After dinner, Kevin wandered into the guest room and stopped in the doorway. Dad, is this the nursery? Emma's stuffed animals lined up on the shelf. Lucas's elephant nightlight plugged into the wall. The toddler bed I'd bought in hope that would never be used. I kept it ready, I said quietly, just in case. Kevin stood there for a long moment, taking in the evidence of a grandfather's love preserved in fabric and plastic and the persistent belief that family could be saved. Then he crossed the room, picked up a stuffed giraffe that had been Emma's favorite, and held it against his chest. I'm going to get them back, Dad. Whatever it takes. We're going to get them back, I corrected. Together. He nodded, not trusting his voice. I left him alone with his grief and his hope, and the ghost of the family he was fighting to reclaim. In my own room, I pulled out the framed photo of Linda I kept on my nightstand. We've got a fight ahead of us, I told her, but I think we finally have a chance. In the darkness of my empty bedroom, I could almost hear her voice. Give them hell, Robert. Give them hell. The Ashfords figured out something was wrong within 72 hours. I know the exact moment because Kevin's phone rang at 6:14 a.m. on a Thursday, the kind of early morning call that's never good news. We were sitting at my kitchen table, going over the timelines Sandra had prepared for the Adult Protective Services filing, when Rachel's name lit up his screen. Kevin looked at me. I nodded. He answered on speaker. Where are you? Rachel's voice was sharp, controlled, the tone of someone accustomed to managing situations. You didn't come home last night. Again. I told you I was staying with a friend. What friend, Marcus? I called him. He hasn't seen you in weeks. Kevin's jaw tightened.
Since when do you track my friendships? Since you started lying to me about where you sleep. A pause, calculated. Kevin, I'm worried about you. The stress of everything that's happening. Maybe you should talk to someone. Dr. Whitmore has an opening tomorrow. My parents offered to pay for an intensive outpatient program if you need. I don't need a psychiatrist, Rachel. The children are asking about you. Her voice softened, weaponized vulnerability. Emma cried herself to sleep last night. She wanted to know why Daddy wasn't there to read her story. Lucas keeps looking for you at breakfast. Another pause. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together. Just come home. Please. I watched Kevin's face as he listened to his wife manipulate him with surgical precision. The guilt was there, it would probably always be there when it came to his children, but something else was there too, something harder. Put Emma on the phone. What? I want to talk to my daughter. Put her on. A longer pause this time. When Rachel spoke again, the softness was gone. The children are at school, Kevin. It's Thursday morning. Where exactly do you think they'd be? It's 6:14 a.m. Rachel. School doesn't start until 8:30. Silence. Kevin leaned closer to the phone. Where are Emma and Lucas right now? There. They stayed with my parents last night. The transition has been hard on them. And Mother thought. You sent my children to Mercer Island without telling me. Our children, Kevin, and I made a parenting decision while you were off doing God knows what, with God knows who. Rachel's voice turned icy. Don't pretend to be father of the year when you've been AWOL for 3 days. I want to see them. Today. That's not possible. Why not? Because my attorney advised against unsupervised contact until we've resolved the outstanding issues in our case. Each word was clipped, precise. If you want to see Emma and Lucas, you can petition the court like anyone else. Kevin's hand was shaking around the phone. You can't do this. We don't have a custody order yet. I have every right. You have the rights I choose to give you. All pretense of concern had evaporated. This was the real Rachel, the one she'd hidden behind carefully applied makeup and practiced smiles for 6 years. Come home, Kevin. Sign the agreement my father's lawyers prepared. Accept the terms we've offered. And maybe, I'll let you see your children for an hour next weekend. And if I don't, then I'll make sure you never see them again. Her voice dropped to something almost intimate, almost tender. You know I can do it. You know my family has the resources. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Kevin looked at me across the kitchen table. I nodded again. Rachel, he said, his voice steadier than I'd heard it in months. I'm not signing anything. I'm not coming home, and I'm not letting you take my children. Kevin, we're done. My lawyer will be in touch. He ended the call before she could respond. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Kevin stared at his phone like it might explode, his chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. That was brave, I said quietly. That was terrifying. He set the phone down with trembling hands. She's going to tell Theodore. He's going to. Let him. We're ready. But even as I said the words, I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. We had evidence, yes, we had recordings and documents and a legal team that believed in our case. But Theodore Ashford had been playing this game for decades, and we'd just announced ourselves as opponents. The war had officially begun. Theodore's response came faster than expected. At 2:47 that afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find 2 police officers standing on my porch, their expressions carefully neutral in the way that suggested something unpleasant was about to happen. Mr. Robert Chen. Yes, sir, we've received a welfare check request. A family member reported concerns about your mental state and potential self-harm risk. We need to come inside and assess the situation. I blinked. A welfare check. I'm fine. Who called this in? The officers exchanged glances. A Mr. Theodore Ashford. He indicated you'd made threats against yourself and others during a recent family dispute. The audacity was breathtaking. Theodore had weaponized the mental health system, using a wellness check as a harassment tool. If I refused to let them in, I'd look like I had something to hide. If I let them in and showed any sign of stress, which I absolutely would, given the circumstances, they might decide I needed a psychiatric evaluation. Officers, I'd be happy to speak with you. I kept my voice calm, measured.
But I should tell you that Mr. Ashford is currently under investigation for elder financial abuse, and this call appears to be an attempt to intimidate me.
I have documentation if you'd like to see it. The first officer's eyebrows rose slightly. Documentation. Bank statements, forged trust documents, recordings of Mr. Ashford discussing his plans.
My attorney has copies of everything.
Would you like his contact information? There's a particular expression people get when they realize they've walked into something more complicated than expected. Both officers wore it now.
Sir, we're required to complete the wellness check regardless. May we come in? Of course. I led them through my house, answering their questions with the patient calm of someone who had nothing to hide and everything to prove. No, I wasn't feeling suicidal. No, I hadn't made threats against anyone. Yes, I was eating and sleeping normally. Yes, I had support systems. My son was staying with me, in fact. Kevin appeared in the hallway, looking alarmed at the uniforms.
I introduced him, explained the situation, watched the officer's expressions shift further towards skepticism about the call's legitimacy.
20 minutes later, they left with Gerald Patterson's business card and my signed statement declining any mental health intervention. That's going to be documented, Kevin said after they'd gone.
A wellness check, even an unfounded one. Theodore can use that in the custody case. Let him try.
I was already pulling out my phone. He just gave us evidence of harassment.
I'm calling Sandra. The next 3 days brought an escalating series of attacks. Friday, a certified letter arrived from Ashford Capital Management's legal department, demanding repayment of loans totaling $312,000 that I had allegedly received from Theodore over the past 5 years. The letter included fabricated promissory notes with forged signatures, mine and Kevin's, and threatened immediate legal action if payment wasn't received within 30 days. Saturday,
someone called my neighbors, claiming to be conducting a community safety survey and asking questions about my behavior, my mental state, whether I'd been acting strangely or making concerning statements.
2 neighbors called me suspicious. 3 others, I learned later, had provided damaging statements they'd assumed were confidential. Sunday, my bank informed me that my accounts had been frozen pending an investigation into suspicious activity. The timing was no coincidence. Theodore had banking connections throughout Spokane, the same connections he'd used to plant the newspaper story about the airport incident. One phone call to the right person, a hint about potential fraud, and suddenly I couldn't access my own money. They're trying to break you, Sandra said during our emergency meeting Monday morning.
This is a standard pressure campaign. Financial strangulation, social isolation, institutional harassment.
Theodore knows he can't win in court, so he's trying to make you give up before we get there.
Will it work? Only if you let it. She pulled out a thick folder. Here's what we're doing.
I've filed an emergency motion to unfreeze your accounts, citing harassment and abuse of process.
Gerald is preparing a defamation claim based on the neighbor interviews.
And I've requested an expedited hearing on the custody matter,
arguing that Rachel's refusal to allow Kevin contact with his children constitutes parental alienation. What about the fake loan documents? Those are actually a gift. Sandra smiled
grimly. Theodore got greedy. The promissory notes he fabricated reference specific dates and amounts that we can definitively prove are false. His own documentation is going to destroy him. Kevin had been silent through most of the meeting, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. Now he spoke up.
There's something else.
Something I didn't tell you about before.
Sandra and Gerald both turned to look at him. Rachel keeps a safe in our bedroom closet. Combination lock, fireproof, about the size of a mini fridge.
She told me it was for important documents, birth certificates, passports, insurance papers. He swallowed hard. But I found the real combination about 6 months ago. She'd written it in the back of her day planner, thought I wouldn't look there. What's in the safe, Kevin? Gerald asked carefully.
Everything. Kevin's voice was barely above a whisper. Bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed.
Cash, at least $50,000. Maybe more. Jewelry that definitely didn't come from any gift I gave her. And documents. Papers about properties, investment accounts, offshore transfers. Things with my name on them that I never signed. I felt the blood drain from my face. Your name? Rachel's been using my identity, Dad, for years. Opening accounts, taking out loans, moving money, all under my social security number. He looked at Sandra desperately. If those documents exist,
It proves she's been committing fraud, but it also means I'm legally liable for things I didn't even know about. Sandra was already making notes. Can you get into the house? Access the safe. I still have my keys. Rachel doesn't know I made copies of the ones she took. Kevin hesitated. But if I go there and she catches me, we'll do it legally. Gerald was pulling out his phone. I know a judge who owes me a favor. We can get an emergency order, allowing Kevin to retrieve personal documents from the marital residence. Rachel won't be able to stop us without admitting she's been hiding something. How fast? If we file today, we might have authorization by Wednesday. Sandra gathered her papers.
In the meantime, Kevin, I need you to write down everything you remember about those documents.
Account numbers, property addresses, anything that might help us trace the fraud. And Mr. Chen, she turned to me. Don't answer your door. Don't respond to any communications from the Ashfords, and document everything. Every letter, every phone call, every suspicious vehicle parked on your street. Theodore is going to get more aggressive before this is over. She was right about that. Tuesday night, someone threw a brick through my living room window. The glass shattered at 2:23 a.m., startling me awake with the adrenaline-spiked clarity of genuine danger. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd started keeping beside my bed and moved carefully into the hallway, where Kevin was already emerging from the guest room. Stay back, I whispered. The living room was cold, December air streaming through the jagged hole where my front window used to be. Shards of glass glittered across my carpet like scattered diamonds. And there, in the center of the debris, was the brick.
There was a note rubber banded to it. Drop the case or lose more than windows. Kevin's hands were shaking as he called 911. I stood in my ruined living room, brick in hand, and felt something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also something else.
Something that felt like the last shreds of hesitation burning away. Theodore Ashford had attacked my reputation. He'd frozen my money. He'd tried to have me declared mentally unfit. And now he'd escalated to physical intimidation, putting my son and myself in actual danger. This wasn't a legal dispute anymore. This was war, and I was done playing defense. The police took the brick, the note, and photographs of the damage. They made sympathetic noises about increasing patrols in my neighborhood, but were careful not to promise anything concrete. Without witnesses or security footage, there wasn't much they could do. After they left, Kevin and I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee as the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. Neither of us had been able to sleep after the incident, our nerves too raw, our minds too busy cataloging threats. We should stay somewhere else, Kevin said. A hotel, maybe. Somewhere they don't know about. No. Dad, they threw a brick through your window. Next time it could be. I'm not running. I set down my coffee cup with more force than intended. This is my home. The home I shared with your mother for 32 years. I'm not letting Theodore Ashford chase me out of it. Then what do we do? I thought about the recordings, the forged documents, the safe full of evidence waiting to be discovered. I thought about Emma's laugh and Lucas's tiny fingers and the nursery that sat empty down the hall. We accelerate the timeline, I said. We're done waiting for court dates and emergency orders. Tomorrow, we go public. Kevin stared at me. Public? How? Theodore used the media against me with that newspaper story. Two can play that game. I pulled out my laptop, opening a browser window. I know a reporter at the Seattle Times. Worked with her years ago on a story about bridge safety. She's been covering financial crimes for the past decade. You're going to give her our evidence? I'm going to give her everything. The trust fraud, the forged signatures, the recordings. Let Theodore try to spin his way out of documentary proof. I met Kevin's eyes. It's a risk. Once this goes public, there's no controlling the narrative. But right now, Theodore thinks he's the only one who can use public pressure. Let's show him he's wrong. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Do it. Whatever it takes to get my kids back, do it. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 15 years. Margaret Chen. No relation, despite the shared surname. Award-winning investigative journalist. Known for taking down corrupt executives and exposing financial fraud with the kind of meticulous documentation that made her stories impossible to refute. She answered on the third ring. Margaret? It's Robert Chen. We worked together on the I-90 project back in 2008. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I have a story for you. Elder financial abuse, forged documents, a Mercer Island family with old money and dirty secrets. And I have recordings. A long pause. I'm listening. The emergency order came through Wednesday afternoon, faster than Gerald had predicted. Judge Patricia Yamamoto, a former family law attorney with a reputation for cutting through procedural nonsense, had read our filing and granted immediate authorization for Kevin to retrieve personal documents and belongings from the marital residence. The order specified that a sheriff's deputy would accompany him to ensure compliance and prevent interference. This is unusual, Gerald admitted as he handed Kevin the signed paperwork. Judges don't typically move this fast unless something in the filing concerns them.
I think Yamamoto saw the pattern, the harassment, the frozen accounts, the wellness check, and recognized what Theodore is doing. Or she's dealt with the Ashfords before, Sandra added darkly. Old money families like that tend to leave a trail of legal complaints. Wouldn't surprise me if this isn't the first time someone's accused them of financial manipulation. Kevin stared at the court order like it was a live grenade.
What if Rachel's home when we get there? What if she tries to stop us? The deputy will handle any interference. Your job is simple: get in, get the documents from the safe, get out. Gerald leaned forward. Kevin, I need you to understand something. Whatever's in that safe could make or break this case. If Rachel really has been committing identity fraud in your name, that evidence gives us leverage we didn't have before.
But if you hesitate, if you give her time to destroy anything, I won't hesitate. I looked at my son, seeing something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Determination that hadn't been filtered through someone else's expectations. I'm going with him, I said.
Gerald shook his head. The order only covers Kevin. If you're there and things escalate, Theodore's lawyers will claim harassment, intimidation. I don't care. My son isn't walking into that house alone. Dad, Kevin started. I'll stay in the car. I won't approach the property or speak to anyone. But I'm not sending you into enemy territory without backup. I met Gerald's eyes.
You can tell the judge I was providing transportation for my son, who's been staying at my residence due to marital difficulties. That's the truth. Gerald sighed. Fine. But Robert, if Rachel or her parents show up and try to engage with you, do not respond. Not a word. Not a gesture. Anything you do can and will be twisted against us. Understood. We scheduled the retrieval for Friday morning, 10 a.m.
Early enough that Rachel would likely be at work, late enough that the deputy assigned to our case would have finished his morning paperwork. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to wait. 2 days for everything to go wrong. Thursday evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. After the past week of harassment calls and suspicious surveys, I'd started screening everything that wasn't already in my contacts.
But something made me pick up. Intuition, maybe, or just the exhaustion of constantly being on guard. Robert Chen. A woman's voice, vaguely familiar but pitched with stress I didn't recognize. Who is this? It's Rosa. Your sister Rosa. I sat down heavily on my couch, the phone suddenly feeling like it weighed 20 pounds. Rosa. My little sister, 5 years younger, who'd married Victor Mendez 23 years ago in a ceremony I'd paid for because our parents were gone and someone had to walk her down the aisle. Rosa, who'd sent me Christmas cards every year and called on my birthday, and had slowly, gradually, faded from my life as Victor's influence grew and my invitations went unanswered. Rosa, whose husband had sold me out for $50,000. Rosa, I'm surprised to hear from you. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, and I understand. But, her voice cracked. Robert, I need to tell you something. About Victor. About what he did. I already know what he did. Silence. Then, quietly. How? Kevin recorded conversations. Theodore and Rachel discussing the trust fraud. Victor's involvement. Everything. I kept my voice flat, emotionless. I know Victor forged my signatures. I know Theodore paid him $50,000. I know about the gambling debts. Rosa started crying, ugly, gasping sobs that came through the phone like static. I didn't know. She managed between breaths. I swear to God, Robert, I didn't know until 3 days ago. Victor came home drunk and he started confessing, saying he was sorry, saying he'd made a terrible mistake, saying Theodore had threatened him, and he didn't know how to get out. And you believed him. I don't know what I believe anymore.
Rosa's voice steadied slightly.
But I know what I found when I went through his office. Bank statements showing deposits that didn't match his salary. Copies of documents with your signature that looked wrong. And emails. God, Robert, the emails. Theodore's been blackmailing him for over a year. The gambling wasn't just debt. Victor took money from his clients' escrow accounts. If Theodore goes public with that, Victor goes to prison. I processed this information slowly, fitting it into the picture I'd been assembling. Victor hadn't just been bribed, he'd been trapped. Theodore had found his weakness, exploited it, and then used the exploitation itself as leverage to demand more. Why are you telling me this, Rosa? Because you're my brother. She was crying again. Because I spent 20 years letting Victor pull me away from my family. And now I find out he's been helping destroy yours. Because I'm angry, Robert. I'm so angry I can barely see straight. And I want Theodore Ashford to pay for what he did to all of us. What are you offering? Everything. Rosa's voice hardened with something that sounded like our mother, the same steel that had carried Carmen Chen through immigration and poverty and raising 2 children alone after our father died. I have access to Victor's files, his computer passwords, his correspondence with Theodore going back 18 months. If you need documentation of how this scheme was put together, I can get it for you. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the quiet street where someone had thrown a brick 3 nights ago. Rosa, if you do this, your marriage is over. Victor will go to prison. Your life will be destroyed. My life is already destroyed. I just didn't know it until now. A pause. Let me help you, Robert. Let me make this right. I thought about the evidence we already had. The recordings, the forged trust documents, the custody filing, Rachel's safe full of secrets. We had enough to fight. Maybe even enough to win. But Rosa was offering something more. A complete picture of how Theodore operated. Documentation that could expose not just this scheme, but his entire methodology. The kind of evidence that could put him away for years, not just cost him money in a civil settlement. Can you meet me tomorrow morning, early, before the retrieval? Where? My house. 7 a.m. Bring everything you can carry. I'll be there. I ended the call and stood in the darkness of my living room, feeling the pieces shift on a chessboard I was only beginning to understand. Theodore Ashford thought he was playing against a broken old man and a spineless son-in-law. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Rosa arrived at 6:47 a.m. with 2 cardboard boxes and eyes that looked like she hadn't slept in days. I made coffee while she spread documents across my kitchen table. 18 months of Victor's correspondence with Theodore, bank records showing the flow of bribe money, copies of the forged documents with Victor's notarization stamps, and email chains that detailed the conspiracy in Theodore's own words. He thought he was being careful. Rosa said, her voice hollow. Encrypted email, code phrases, everything. But Victor kept backups of everything, in case he ever needed to protect himself. Theodore didn't know. She laughed bitterly. Turns out my husband's paranoia might actually do some good. Kevin came downstairs while we were organizing the files, stopping short when he saw Rosa. Aunt Rosa, Kevin. She stood up awkwardly. I'm so sorry. For everything. I should have seen what was happening. Should have. It's okay. Kevin crossed the kitchen and hugged her, a gesture that seemed to surprise them both. We're past blame now. We're just trying to survive. By 8:30, we had everything cataloged and photographed. Sandra arrived at 9 to review the new evidence, her expression shifting from skepticism to genuine excitement as she flipped through the documents. This is exceptional, she said finally. Victor's records show the entire chain of command. Theodore giving instructions, Rachel providing inside information about Kevin's finances, Victor executing the paperwork. She looked at Rosa. Mrs. Mendez, are you willing to testify about how you obtained these documents? Rosa nodded. Victor doesn't know I took them. He was passed out drunk when I copied everything. But yes, I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes. Then we have everything we need to destroy them. Sandra began gathering the papers. Gerald is meeting us at the courthouse in an hour. We're going to file an amended complaint that includes all of this new evidence, and then Kevin is going to retrieve whatever's in that safe. What about the media story? I asked. Margaret Chen, the reporter I contacted. Hold off for now. Let's see what's in the safe first. If Rachel really has been committing identity fraud, we want that evidence in hand before we go public. Sandra's smile was razor-sharp. By this time tomorrow, Theodore Ashford is going to wish he'd never heard the name Chen.
The house in Kirkland looked different in the harsh morning light.
I'd driven past it dozens of times over the years, picking up Emma for our Wednesday afternoons, dropping Kevin off after family dinners, admiring the landscaping that my money had paid for,
but I'd always seen it through the lens of pride and love, the home where my grandchildren lived, the investment in my son's future. Now I saw it for what it really was, a facade. Pretty exterior, rotten foundation.
Kevin got out of my truck and met Deputy Martinez by the front gate. They exchanged words I couldn't hear, then approached the door together.
Rachel's car wasn't in the driveway.
Sandra had confirmed she was at work, her calendar showing back-to-back meetings until 2 p.m. We had 4 hours. Plenty of time.
I sat in my truck with the engine off, watching through the windshield as Kevin unlocked the front door and disappeared inside.
Deputy Martinez followed, his body camera recording everything. 47 minutes. That's how long it took for Kevin to emerge, carrying a black duffel bag that hung heavy from his shoulder. His face was pale, his movements jerky, with the kind of controlled panic that meant he'd found something significant.
He didn't speak until we were 3 blocks away, out of sight of any neighbors who might report back to Rachel.
"Dad." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad, it's worse than we thought. What did you find?"
Kevin unzipped the duffel bag with shaking hands. Inside were folders, dozens of them, along with stacks of cash, several jewelry boxes, and a small laptop I didn't recognize.
The documents were organized by year. He pulled out a folder labeled 2019 and opened it. "Look at this. Loan applications in my name for properties I've never seen. Credit cards I never applied for. Investment accounts with balances that..." He stopped, staring at a bank statement. "Dad, there's an account in the Cayman Islands. In my name, with $340,000 in it." I pulled over to the side of the road, unable to drive and process this information simultaneously. $340,000. And that's just one account. There are others, Switzerland, Singapore, someplace called Nevis I've never even heard of. Kevin's hands were trembling so badly the papers rustled like leaves in a storm. Rachel's been hiding money for years.
Moving it offshore, putting it in accounts under my name so it wouldn't show up in their joint finances. "For the divorce," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "She's been planning this for years."
Building a hidden fortune that you'd be legally responsible for while she kept her hands clean. There's more. Kevin pulled out another folder, this one unlabeled. I found correspondence between Rachel and her father. Planning documents, timelines. He handed me a single sheet of paper, an email printout dated January 2020. "Daddy, Phase 1 complete." Kay signed the power of attorney without reading it, as predicted. Now moving to Phase 2, establish offshore accounts using his credentials. Timeline for full extraction, 5 years. By 2025, we should have full control of both Chen estates and enough documentation to destroy Kay's credibility if he ever tries to fight back. I read the email 3 times, each pass making my blood run colder. Both Chen estates, they hadn't just been targeting me. The plan from the beginning, from before Emma was even born, had been to strip both Kevin and me of everything we owned. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of manipulation and fraud and systematic theft, all building toward a moment when Rachel would walk away with millions, while Kevin was left holding the bag for crimes he didn't commit. "They were going to frame you," I said. "The offshore accounts, the loans, the forged documents. If you'd ever tried to divorce Rachel, she would have produced all of this and claimed you were hiding assets. You'd have gone to prison. And lost the kids." Kevin's voice cracked. "Even if I'd fought and won somehow, the custody case would have destroyed me. A father with hidden offshore accounts and documented financial fraud. No judge would give me custody. But you found out too early. You started recording. You came to me. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to contain the rage building in my chest. They had to accelerate their timeline. That's why Rachel filed for custody when she did. You were getting suspicious, and they needed to lock you out before you could expose them." Kevin stared at the documents in his lap like they were written in a foreign language. "I was never her husband," he said quietly. "I was just a vehicle, a way to get to you, to your money, to everything our family had built. She never loved me. She never even saw me as a person."
I reached over and gripped my son's shoulder, feeling the tension vibrating through him like a plucked wire. Kevin, look at me. He raised his eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted. They made one mistake, I said. They underestimated you. They thought you'd never fight back, never question, never find the courage to stand up. But you did. You started recording. You copied the combination. You came to me. I squeezed his shoulder.
They planned this for years, and you dismantled it in months.
Don't you dare let them make you feel small. Kevin nodded slowly, something hardening behind his eyes. What do we do now? I pulled back onto the road, heading toward Gerald's office.
Now we end this.
Rachel discovered the raid at 2:34 p.m. I know the exact time, because that's when Kevin's phone exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls, 23 text messages, and a voicemail so venomous that even the deputy who'd accompanied us to the house raised his eyebrows when we
played it back in Gerald's office. You think you're clever? You think breaking into my home and stealing my property is going to help you? My father is going to destroy you, Kevin. Both of you. By the time we're done, you won't be able to get a job at McDonald's, and your pathetic father will be eating dog food in a nursing home. Call me back. Gerald saved the voicemail to 3 separate backup drives. This is excellent, he said, and I noticed Kevin flinch at the word. She's threatening you on a recorded line, admitting the safe contents were hers, which contradicts any claim that you were the one hiding assets, and demonstrating exactly the kind of emotional instability that will concern a family court judge. She's also very, very angry, Sandra added. Angry people make mistakes. Let's see what mistakes she makes in the next 48 hours. We didn't have to wait that long. The first mistake came at 6:17 that evening. Kevin and I were at my house, going through the offshore account documents with a forensic accountant Sandra had brought in, a quiet man named David Park who specialized in tracing hidden assets through international banking systems. He'd been working for 3 hours, building a flowchart on my dining room wall that looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. The money originated from multiple sources, David explained, tapping a node on his chart. Some of it appears to be legitimate savings that Rachel redirected into hidden accounts. But this cluster here, he indicated a web of transactions totaling nearly $200,000. This came from your father's accounts, Kevin. The daycare payments, the loans, the gifts. Rachel was skimming roughly 15% of everything Robert sent and funneling it offshore before it ever hit your household accounts. Kevin stared at the chart. She was stealing from my father while he was supporting us. For at least 3 years. David shook his head. It's actually quite sophisticated. Small amounts, regular intervals, routed through shell companies that made the transfers look like legitimate business expenses. If you hadn't found those account statements in the safe, we might never have traced it. My doorbell rang. I checked the security camera I'd installed after the brick incident. Another expense I could suddenly afford now that I wasn't subsidizing my granddaughter's Mandarin immersion program, and felt my stomach drop. Rachel was standing on my porch, alone. No Theodore, no Margot, no lawyer as a buffer. Just my former daughter-in-law in a $400 blouse, her makeup slightly smudged, her posture radiating the kind of controlled fury that preceded explosions. Don't open it, Kevin said immediately. She's on camera. Everything's being recorded. I looked at Gerald, who had stayed late to review the financial documents. What do you think? Gerald considered for a moment. Let her in. Sometimes the best evidence is what people say when they think they're in control. I opened the door. Rachel, this is unexpected. She pushed past me without invitation, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors. She stopped when she saw Kevin at the dining room table, her expression flickering through surprise, anger, and something that might have been fear before settling into cold composure. I want to talk to my husband. Alone. That's not going to happen. I positioned myself between her and Kevin. Anything you have to say, you can say in front of witnesses. Witnesses? Rachel laughed, but it came out brittle. What is this, a courtroom? I'm trying to save my marriage, Robert. Something you wouldn't understand, since you apparently think the best way to help your son is to destroy his family. You destroyed this family, Rachel. Kevin's voice was steady, stronger than I'd heard it in months. You've been destroying it for years. I just didn't see it until now. Kevin, you're confused. You're under stress. Your father has been feeding you paranoid fantasies about conspiracies and fraud, and you're too weak to see that he's manipulating you. Rachel took a step toward him,
her voice softening into the practiced concern I now recognized as a weapon. Come home. We can talk about this. Work through whatever issues you think you found. The children miss you. Emma cries every night asking when Daddy's coming back. Don't. Kevin stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. Don't you dare use my children against me. You've been doing that for years, and I'm done. I'm done being threatened, done being manipulated, done being afraid that standing up for myself means losing Emma and Lucas. You will lose them. All pretense of warmth evaporated. You'll lose everything, Kevin. My father has lawyers that will bury you so deep you'll need a shovel to see daylight. We have documentation proving your financial instability, your erratic behavior, your collusion with your mentally unstable father to defraud our family. You mean this documentation? Kevin reached into the black duffel bag and pulled out the folder containing Rachel's email to Theodore, the one outlining the 5-year plan to drain both Chen estates. Rachel's face went white. Where did you get that? You're safe. The one you thought I didn't know the combination to. Kevin opened the folder and began reading aloud. Phase 1 complete. K signed the power of attorney without reading it. Now moving to Phase 2. Establish offshore accounts using his credentials. He looked up at his wife. You want to explain to me what Phase 3 was going to be, Rachel? Were you going to wait until I was in prison for fraud before you took the kids? Or were you planning to skip straight to having me declared incompetent? That's taken out of context. You don't understand what you're reading. I understand perfectly. Kevin's voice was ice. I understand that you married me for access to my father's money. I understand that you've been committing identity fraud in my name for at least 4 years. I understand that there are $340,000 in offshore accounts with my social security number attached to them. Accounts I never opened, never knew about, and will absolutely not be taking responsibility for when this goes to court. Rachel turned to me, desperation cracking through her composure. Robert, please. Whatever Kevin thinks he's found, there's an explanation. My father can explain everything if you just. Your father is the one who orchestrated this. I kept my voice calm, detached. The voice I'd use for decades when explaining structural failures to people who didn't want to hear bad news. We have recordings, Rachel. Theodore discussing the trust fraud with Victor Mendez. Theodore planning how to use the forged documents to take control of my assets. Theodore threatening to expose Victor's embezzlement if he didn't cooperate. The color drained from Rachel's face so completely she looked like a ghost. You can't have. Washington is a 2-party consent state, so we probably can't use the recordings directly in criminal court. But civil court is different. Family court is different. I stepped closer, watching her retreat. And journalists don't need anyone's consent to report on matters of public interest. Tomorrow morning, the Seattle Times is going to publish a story about a Mercer Island family that systematically defrauded a retired civil engineer out of $250,000. Your father's name will be in the headline. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Rachel. I build bridges. And right now, I'm building a bridge between your family's crimes and the consequences you spent years avoiding. Rachel stood frozen for a long moment, calculations running behind her eyes. I could almost see her weighing options, discarding strategies, searching for some angle that would let her regain control. Then she laughed. Not the brittle, defensive laugh from before. Something colder. Something that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. You think you've won, she said softly. You think finding some documents and talking to a reporter means you've beaten us. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Robert. My family has survived scandals that would destroy ordinary people. We have friends in places you can't imagine. Judges, prosecutors, people who owe us favors going back generations. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. She straightened her blouse, composure reassembling itself like armor. Publish your little story. File your complaints. Make all the noise you want. By the time this is over, you'll wish you'd taken the deal my father offered. Photos and birthday cards from a comfortable distance. Because what's coming now is going to be so much worse. She walked out without another word, the click of her heels echoing through my house like gunshots. Kevin sank back into his chair, trembling. She's right, he said. They have connections. They have money. They have nothing. Gerald had been silent throughout the confrontation, observing with the careful attention of a lawyer building a case. That performance just gave us evidence of witness intimidation, threats against a complaining party,
and acknowledgement that Theodore offered Robert a deal to stay silent. She walked in here thinking she could bully you into submission, and walked out having strengthened our case immeasurably. But what if she's telling the truth? What if they have judges in their pocket? Then we go to federal court. Sandra had been equally silent, taking notes on her phone. Elder financial abuse involving wire fraud across state lines is a federal crime.
Theodore's scheme used banks in multiple states and offshore accounts in foreign jurisdictions.
The FBI has been cracking down on elder fraud for years. They'd love a case with this much documentation. Kevin looked at me, fear and hope warring on his face. Dad, what do we do? I thought about Rachel's threat, about Theodore's connections, about the war we'd started and couldn't stop.
We do exactly what we planned, I said. Tomorrow, the story goes public. Friday, we file the amended complaint with all the evidence from the safe, and Saturday, I paused, a new idea forming. Saturday, we're going to Mercer Island. Gerald frowned. For what purpose? Theodore's hosting his annual holiday party, 100 guests, caterers, the whole society circus. I've seen photos on Rachel's Instagram for years. Senators, business leaders, old money from across the Pacific Northwest. I smiled grimly. If Theodore wants to play games with connections and influence, let's see how his connections feel when they learn who they've been associating with. You want to crash the party. I want to end this. Publicly. Completely. In front of everyone who matters to Theodore Ashford. I looked at Kevin. Are you with me? My son took a deep breath. I'm with you, Dad. All the way. The Seattle Times story went live at 6 a.m. Friday morning. Mercer Island family accused of elder fraud scheme. A retired Washington state civil engineer claims he was defrauded of more than $240,000 by his daughter-in-law's family through forged documents, identity theft, and systematic financial manipulation spanning 5 years. Margaret Chen had done exceptional work. The article was meticulously documented, carefully worded to avoid libel, while still conveying the severity of the allegations. She'd included quotes from Sandra about the patterns of elder financial abuse, statistics about how often family members were the perpetrators, and a statement from Adult Protective Services confirming that an investigation was underway. Theodore Ashford was named directly, along with his company Ashford Capital Management. Rachel was identified as the estranged wife of the victim's son. Victor Mendez was mentioned as a financial professional allegedly recruited to provide forged notarizations. The comments section exploded within hours. By noon, the story had been picked up by 3 local television stations and a national wire service. By 3 p.m., Theodore had issued a statement through his attorney denying all allegations and threatening to sue the Times for defamation. By 6 p.m., 2 additional victims had contacted Margaret, claiming they'd experienced similar treatment from Ashford Capital Management years earlier. The cracks were spreading. But so was the counterattack. At 4:47 p.m., Kevin received an emergency notification from the family court. Rachel's lawyers had filed an ex parte motion, a legal maneuver that allowed them to get a judge's ruling without the other party present, claiming that Kevin posed an imminent threat to the children's safety based on his erratic behavior, documented mental instability, and association with individuals under investigation for financial crimes. The judge had granted temporary sole custody to Rachel, effective immediately. Kevin couldn't see Emma or Lucas until a full hearing could be scheduled. In 3 weeks. He broke down completely when he read the ruling, sobbing in my kitchen while Gerald made furious phone calls and Sandra drafted emergency appeals. 21 days without his children. 21 days of Rachel poisoning them against their father, telling them Daddy didn't love them anymore, erasing everything Kevin had been to them. They can't do this, he kept saying. They can't just take them. I haven't done anything wrong. But they could do it. They had done it. In family court, accusations were weapons, and the Ashfords had just demonstrated they were willing to use the most devastating weapon in their arsenal. I sat beside my son, holding him the way I had when he was 7, and the world seemed too big and too cruel, and I felt something harden inside my chest. Theodore Ashford wanted to play dirty. Fine. Tomorrow night, at his precious holiday party, surrounded by everyone who mattered in his carefully constructed world, I would show him what dirty really looked like. The phone call came at 11:23 p.m. Kevin had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, exhausted by grief and fear, and the weight of a future that seemed to be collapsing around him. I was sitting in my kitchen, going over the evidence one more time, when my cell phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered. Mr. Chen. Robert Chen? A woman's voice, unfamiliar, speaking quickly in a whisper that suggested she was afraid of being overheard. Who is this? My name is Patricia Morrison. I'm the lifestyle editor at the Spokane Review, the one who wrote the story about you abandoning those people at the airport. I went still. Why are you calling me? Because I made a mistake.
Theodore Ashford fed me that story, told me it was a favor for an old friend who'd been treated badly by a vindictive relative. I didn't check the facts like I should have. She paused, her breathing uneven. I read the Times story today.
I saw what they're actually accusing him of, and I realized I helped him. I helped him destroy an innocent man's reputation because I was too lazy to ask questions. What do you want, Ms. Morrison? I want to make it right. Her voice strengthened.
I have emails from Theodore, the ones he sent setting up the original story. He told me exactly what to write, what quotes to use, how to frame you as unstable and dangerous. It's all documented, and I'm willing to testify about it, go on the record, whatever you need. Another ally, emerging from the wreckage of Theodore's scheme.
Why are you risking your career for this? Because I have a father, too, Mr. Chen.
A father who trusted the wrong people with his money when he got sick, who lost everything to someone who smiled while they robbed him. Patricia's voice cracked. I know what financial predators do to families.
I know how they use shame and fear to keep their victims silent. And I can't be part of that anymore, even if it costs me everything. I gave her Gerald's number and thanked her for her courage.
After I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street
where someone had thrown a brick 1 week and a lifetime ago. Theodore Ashford had spent decades building his empire on other people's trust.
He'd used connections and money and the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd never faced real consequences.
But empires built on fraud had a weakness. They only needed one crack to come crashing down. Tomorrow night, I was going to provide several.
The Ashford estate occupied 3 acres of prime Mercer Island waterfront, a monument to generational wealth built on the bones of people Theodore had stepped over to get where he was. I'd seen it in photographs. Rachel's Instagram posts showing off the manicured gardens, the infinity pool overlooking Lake Washington, the imported Italian marble that covered every surface like a disease of affluence.
But photographs couldn't capture the sheer arrogance of the place. The way it seemed to look down at the surrounding properties the same way Theodore looked down at everyone he considered beneath him. Which was everyone. Kevin and I sat in my truck at the end of the long driveway, watching luxury cars arrive in a steady stream. Mercedes, BMW, Tesla, a Bentley that probably cost more than my house. The cream of Pacific Northwest society, gathering to celebrate the holidays with a man who'd built his fortune on fraud.
Are you sure about this? Kevin asked. His hands were steady now. He moved past fear into something colder, more focused.
The loss of his children had burned away whatever hesitation remained. No, I admitted, but I'm doing it anyway.
The evidence packets sat in a box on the back seat. 100 copies, each containing a summary of the fraud allegations, key excerpts from the recordings, transcribed, since we couldn't distribute the audio itself. Copies of the forged trust documents with expert annotations highlighting the irregularities,
and a timeline showing how the scheme had unfolded over 5 years.
Sandra had wanted us to wait, to let the legal process play out, to trust the system that moved so slowly while my grandchildren were being poisoned against their father. Gerald had warned us about the risks, trespassing charges, potential assault claims if anyone got physical, the possibility that Theodore's lawyers would use this as evidence of harassment. I didn't care. Some battles couldn't be won in courtrooms. Some justice had to be delivered in person. Ready? I asked. Kevin nodded. Let's end this. We weren't on the guest list, obviously.
The security guard at the gate, a bored-looking man in a too-tight blazer, held up his hand as we approached.
Names?
Robert Chen and Kevin Chen. We're family. The guard checked his tablet, frowning. I don't see you on the list, sir. Call Theodore.
Tell him his son-in-law is here to discuss the Seattle Times article. I kept my voice pleasant, conversational. I'm sure he'll want to handle this personally, rather than have us make a scene at the front gate.
The guard's frown deepened, but he reached for his radio.
A brief conversation followed, I caught fragments. Says he's family. Something about a newspaper. And then his expression shifted to something more cautious. Mr. Ashford says you can come in, but he wants to see you in his study first, alone. Of course he does. I looked at Kevin. Wait here. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, start distributing the packets.
Dad, trust me. I followed a second security guard up the curving driveway, past the valet station where uniformed attendants were parking cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries, through a side entrance that avoided the main party, and into a wood-paneled study that smelled like old money and fresh cigars.
Theodore was waiting. He stood behind a mahogany desk that probably had its own insurance policy, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, a crystal glass of something amber in his hand, the picture of composed wealth,
the mask of a man who'd never lost a battle he couldn't buy his way out of. Robert. He didn't offer his hand.
I have to admit, I didn't expect you to have the courage to show up here.
I'm full of surprises. Apparently. He gestured to a leather chair across from the desk. Sit. Let's discuss this like civilized men. I'll stand. Theodore's smile flickered. As you wish. I assume you're here to negotiate. The newspaper story was a clever move. I underestimated your willingness to go public. But surely you understand that this can still be resolved quietly. The allegations will be investigated, found baseless and forgotten. These things always are, when handled properly. Is that what you told the other victims?
The ones who've been calling the Times since yesterday. Something dark moved behind Theodore's eyes. Opportunists. People who see a wealthy target and smell settlement money. None of their claims will hold up under scrutiny. And the recordings? Silence. I watched Theodore process the word, watched him run through possibilities and scenarios, watched him arrive at the conclusion I've been waiting for. What recordings? The ones Kevin made over the past 6 months. You, discussing the trust fraud with Victor Mendez. You, explaining how to forge my signatures. You, threatening to expose Victor's embezzlement if he didn't cooperate. I took a step closer, enjoying the way Theodore's composure cracked at the edges. Did you know Washington is a two-party consent state? The recordings might not be admissible in criminal court, but they're excellent for civil proceedings. And journalists don't need anyone's consent to report on matters of public interest. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Theodore. I build bridges. Structures that need to bear weight, that need to be engineered precisely, that collapse catastrophically if even one element fails. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a transcript of Theodore's most damning conversation with Victor. Your structure is failing. Right now. And everyone at this party is about to watch it come down. Theodore's hand tightened around his glass. For a moment, I thought he might throw it at me. Instead, he laughed. You think these people will care? You think my friends, senators, CEOs, judges, will abandon me because of some allegations from a bitter old man and his spineless son? Theodore set down his drink and straightened his cuffs. I've survived worse than you, Robert. Investigations, lawsuits, accusations that would have destroyed ordinary men. My family has been part of this community for generations. You've been here for, what, 30 years? You're nobody. You're a footnote. And by tomorrow, you'll be a cautionary tale about what happens when peasants forget their place. We'll see. I turned and walked out of the study, Theodore's laughter following me down the hallway. The main party was in full swing when I emerged into the grand ballroom. 100 guests, maybe more, circulating through a space designed to intimidate. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. A string quartet played something classical in the corner. Waiters in white jackets circulated with champagne flutes and canapes that probably cost more per piece than my weekly grocery budget. Kevin was waiting near the entrance, the box of evidence packets at his feet. How did it go? As expected. He thinks he's untouchable. I scanned the crowd, identifying faces I recognized from Rachel's Instagram posts. Society matrons in designer gowns, business executives with practiced smiles, a state senator I'd voted for twice, chatting with a woman dripping in diamonds. He's about to learn otherwise. We started distributing the packets quietly at first. A stack left on the bar, another near the hors d'oeuvres table, a third by the coat check, where guests would find them on their way out. But quiet wasn't the plan. I waited until the string quartet finished their piece, until the room fell into that natural lull between songs, when conversations quieted and attention became available. Then I walked to the center of the ballroom and raised my voice. Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Chen. I'm Theodore Ashford's son-in-law's father, and I'm here to tell you a story about the man you're celebrating tonight. The effect was immediate. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Somewhere near the back, I heard a woman gasp. Theodore emerged from a side hallway, his face a mask of controlled fury. Security, remove this man immediately. Wait. The voice came from the state senator, a tall man with silver hair and the practiced calm of someone who'd weathered many storms. I want to hear what he has to say. Senator Morrison, this man is mentally disturbed. He's been harassing my family for weeks, making baseless accusations. Then you have nothing to worry about. The senator turned to me. Mr. Chen, you have 5 minutes. I looked around the room at faces that ranged from curious to hostile to carefully neutral. 100 witnesses, 100 potential allies or enemies. 100 people who would remember this night for the rest of their lives. 5 years ago, my son married Theodore's daughter Rachel. I thought I was gaining a family. Instead, I was being set up for the biggest fraud of my life. I told them everything. The daycare payments that had started as genuine help and became a pipeline for exploitation. The forged trust documents designed to give Theodore control of my assets. The systematic isolation of my son from everyone who might have noticed something was wrong. The offshore accounts opened in Kevin's name without his knowledge. The 5-year plan, outlined in Rachel's own email, to drain both Chen estates while framing Kevin for crimes he didn't commit. I have documentation for all of this, I said, gesturing to the packets Kevin was still distributing. Bank statements, forged signatures analyzed by handwriting experts. Transcripts of recorded conversations. A paper trail that leads directly to the man standing in front of you, pretending to be a pillar of this community. Theodore stepped forward, his composure cracking. This is absurd. This man is a disgruntled relative making wild accusations because he couldn't accept his son's marriage. Then explain the trust documents. I pulled out a copy and held it up. Explain why your company prepared paperwork transferring my assets to my son. Paperwork I never signed, never saw, never agreed to. Explain why Victor Mendez, your daughter's uncle by marriage, notarized signatures that handwriting experts have confirmed are forgeries. Victor Mendez is a troubled man with a gambling addiction. Whatever he did on his own. Really? I pulled out another paper. Then why do I have emails from you instructing him exactly how to execute the forgeries? Why do I have recordings of you threatening to expose his embezzlement if he didn't cooperate? A murmur ran through the crowd. I saw guests reaching for the evidence packets, flipping through pages, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern, to something approaching horror. Let me read you something, I continued. This is from an email your daughter sent you in January 2020. Daddy, Phase 1 complete. Kay signed the power of attorney without reading it. Now moving to Phase 2. Establish offshore accounts using his credentials. Timeline for full extraction, 5 years. I looked at Theodore, watching his mask finally shatter. 5 years, Theodore. You spent 5 years planning to steal everything my son and I had. You used your daughter as bait, your connections as weapons, and your money to cover your tracks. And you would have gotten away with it, except for one thing. What? You underestimated my son. I pointed to Kevin, who was standing near the back of the room, shoulders straight, eyes clear. You thought he was weak. You thought you'd broken him so completely he'd never fight back. But Kevin started recording your conversations 6 months ago. He documented everything. And when he found the courage to come to me, we put together a case that's going to destroy you. Theodore's face had gone from red to white to something almost gray. Around him, I could see his friends, his connections, his supporters, pulling away, creating distance, the universal body language of people who didn't want to be associated with a sinking ship. This is slander, Theodore said, but his voice had lost its authority. My lawyers will. Your lawyers can't help you. I stepped closer, speaking quietly enough that only Theodore could hear. Adult Protective Services is investigating. The FBI has been notified about the wire fraud, and tomorrow morning, 2 more victims are going to come forward with their own stories about Ashford Capital Management. I turned to address the crowd one final time. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to look at the evidence, to ask questions, to consider whether the man you've been trusting with your money, your secrets, your friendship, is who he claims to be. I met eyes around the room, one face at a time. Because if Theodore Ashford did this to his own family, what do you think he'd do to you? Silence. The string quartet had stopped playing. Even the waiters had frozen, champagne flutes suspended mid-serve. Then Senator Morrison spoke.
Theodore, I think you owe us an explanation. I don't have to explain anything to anyone. Theodore's voice cracked on the last word. This is my home, my party, and I want these people removed immediately. I'll leave, I said.
But the evidence stays, and so does the truth.
I walked toward the exit, Kevin falling into step beside me. As we passed the coat check, I heard the first crack in Theodore's social armor, a woman's voice, sharp with suspicion.
Theodore, what is he talking about? What trust documents? Then another voice. I invested with Ashford Capital 3 years ago.
Are you telling me? And another. My mother had dealings with your firm before she died.
If any of this is true, the dam was breaking. We were halfway down the driveway when Rachel caught up with us. She burst out of a side door, her gown trailing behind her, her carefully styled hair coming undone.
Gone was the composed manipulator who'd threatened us in my kitchen. This was someone desperate, cornered, finally facing consequences she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Kevin, wait, please. Kevin stopped, turned. His expression was unreadable.
What do you want, Rachel? I want. She took a shaking breath.
I want to explain. Everything you think you know, it's not the whole story.
My father pressured me, manipulated me, made me do things I didn't want to. You wrote that email in 2020. Phase 1 complete. That was your handwriting, your words, your plan. I was trying to protect myself.
You don't know what my father is like when you don't do what he wants. The things he threatened. You could have told me. Kevin's voice was quiet, devastated. 6 years, Rachel. 6 years of marriage, 2 children, and you could have told me the truth at any point. You could have warned me. Instead, you helped him destroy my relationship with my father, steal my identity, frame me for crimes I didn't commit. I was scared. So was I. Kevin stepped closer, and for a moment I saw the man he might have been if Rachel had never entered.
His life, confident, clear-eyed, unbroken.
I was scared every single day of our marriage. Scared of disappointing you. Scared of losing the kids. Scared that I wasn't enough, would never be enough, no matter how hard I tried. He shook his head. But I never lied to you. I never stole from you. I never planned to destroy you and take everything you loved. Kevin, we're done. Rachel.
Whatever happens next, the divorce, the custody case, the criminal investigation, we're done pretending there's anything left to save. He turned and walked away. I followed, leaving Rachel standing alone in the driveway of her father's crumbling empire, mascara running down her cheeks, the sounds of chaos echoing from the ballroom behind her. The drive home was silent. Kevin stared out the window at the Christmas lights twinkling in the houses we passed. Families gathered for holiday celebrations that didn't involve fraud investigations and public confrontations and the systematic destruction of everything they'd believed in. Dad. His voice was hoarse. Yeah, thank you. For what? For fighting. For believing me. For not giving up when everyone else would have just accepted the deal and walked away. He turned to look at me, and I saw tears on his cheeks. I spent 6 years thinking I was alone. That I had to handle everything myself because asking for help meant admitting I couldn't manage my own life. But I was never alone, was I? You were always there. I just couldn't see it. I reached over and gripped his shoulder. That's what fathers do, son. We don't give up. Not ever. Kevin nodded, wiping his eyes. What happens now? I thought about the chaos we'd left behind. The evidence packets being passed from hand to hand. The questions being asked. The cracks spreading through Theodore's carefully constructed reputation. Now we wait, I said, and we get ready for whatever comes next. Whatever came next, I knew, would be ugly. Theodore Ashford wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. He would fight back with everything he had, using every weapon, every connection, every dirty trick in his considerable arsenal. But we'd drawn first blood, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed we might actually win. The fallout from the Mercer Island party began before we even got home. Kevin's phone started buzzing somewhere around Bellevue. Text messages from numbers he didn't recognize, voicemails stacking up faster than he could check them. By the time we pulled into my driveway, He had 47 notifications. People from the party, he said, scrolling through with wide eyes.
They want to talk. They want to know more about the documents.
Someone named Harrison says he invested $2 million with Ashford Capital and wants to know if his money is safe. It's not. I know. But what do I tell him? Tell him to call Gerald. Tell them all to call Gerald. I unlocked my front door, the familiar creak of the hinges sounding different somehow. Lighter. We're not their lawyers. We're just the people who lit the match. The fire, it turned out, spread faster than anyone expected. Sunday morning brought the first defection. Victor Mendez showed up at my door at 7:14 a.m. looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the folder he was carrying. "Robert," his voice cracked on my name. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I need to talk to you. Please." I should have slammed the door in his face. This was the man who'd sold me out for $50,000, who'd forged my signature on documents designed to steal my life savings, who'd chosen Theodore Ashford's money over 23 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings, and the quiet trust that comes from being related by marriage. But I opened the door wider and let him in. "You have 5 minutes." Victor didn't sit. He stood in my living room, clutching his folder like a lifeline, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Theodore called me last night. After the party, he was furious, screaming about how I must have talked, how I must have given you the documentation, how he was going to make sure I went down for everything, while he walked away clean." Victor's voice broke. "He's been planning this for months, Robert. A contingency in case things went wrong. He has documents that make it look like I was the mastermind, like I recruited Rachel and manipulated Theodore into participating. If he releases them, I'll go to prison for decades. And you want me to feel sorry for you? No. I want to help you destroy him." Victor thrust the folder toward me. "This is everything, every email, every instruction, every payment. The original documents Theodore gave me to forge, with his handwriting in the margins. Recordings I made of our conversations. Yes, I recorded him too. Everyone in Theodore's orbit learns to protect themselves eventually." I took the folder, flipping through pages that confirmed everything we'd already suspected and revealed new depths of depravity we hadn't imagined. Theodore had been running schemes like this for over a decade. My family wasn't his first target, just his most recent. The folder contained references to at least 4 other victims, families who'd been systematically defrauded and then silenced through legal threats and financial pressure. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Because I was a coward." Victor met my eyes, and I saw genuine shame there, the kind that couldn't be faked. "Because I told myself it wasn't that bad, that you could afford the losses, that family didn't really mean anything anyway. I was wrong about all of it." He glanced toward the hallway where Kevin had appeared, watching silently. "Rosa told me what you did at the party. How you stood up in front of everyone and told the truth. I've never seen anyone stand up to Theodore like that. It made me realize." He trailed off. "Realize what? That some things matter more than money, more than fear, more than whatever Theodore could do to me." Victor straightened, something resolving in his expression. "I'm going to testify. Against Theodore, against Rachel, against anyone involved in this scheme. I'm going to tell the FBI everything I know, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left trying to be the man Rosa thought she married." I looked at the folder in my hands, at the evidence that would bury Theodore Ashford and everyone who'd helped him. "You understand you'll probably go to prison." "I know. And Rosa knows. We talked all night." Victor's voice softened. "She's angry, she has every right to be, but she said something that I can't stop thinking about. She said, the only way out of this is through it. So that's what I'm doing. Going through it, whatever that costs." I set down the folder and extended my hand. Victor stared at it for a long moment. Then he took it, his grip firm despite the trembling. "I'm not forgiving you," I said. "I may never forgive you, but I'm grateful for the help. That's more than I deserve." He left a few minutes later, looking somehow lighter despite the destruction awaiting him. Kevin came to stand beside me, both of us staring at the folder that had just reshaped the entire battlefield. "Do you believe him?" Kevin asked. "I believe he's scared. I believe Theodore threatened him. And I believe this evidence is real." I picked up the folder. That's enough. The week that followed was chaos.
Monday, Gerald filed our amended complaint, now including Victor's documentation and the additional evidence from the safe. The filing was 247 pages long and named Theodore Ashford, Rachel Chen, Margot Ashford, and Ashford Capital Management in a civil RICO case, the same legal framework used to take down organized crime families. Tuesday, the FBI announced a formal investigation into Ashford Capital Management, citing credible allegations of wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and money laundering. Theodore's assets were frozen pending the investigation. The Mercer Island mansion, we learned later, had been placed under a preservation order to prevent the sale of property that might be needed to satisfy future judgments. Wednesday, 2 more victims came forward publicly, their stories corroborating the patterns we documented. A retired schoolteacher who'd lost $180,000 to a investment opportunity Theodore had personally recommended. A widower whose late wife's estate had been systematically drained through administrative fees that turned out to be pure theft. Thursday, Rachel's lawyers filed an emergency motion to dismiss the custody case, citing changed circumstances and requesting that the temporary order be vacated immediately. The motion was denied. Instead, Judge Yamamoto scheduled an expedited hearing for the following Monday to address Kevin's petition for joint custody. Friday, Theodore Ashford was arrested. The footage made national news. The silver-haired patriarch of a prominent Pacific Northwest family being led out of his Mercer Island estate in handcuffs, photographers capturing every moment of his fall. The charges included wire fraud, conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Bail was set at $5 million. Margot posted it within hours. Theodore was released, but the damage was done. His face was everywhere, his name synonymous with the kind of predatory behavior that made people check their own financial advisors twice. Saturday, Patricia Morrison published a follow-up story in the Spokane Review, a full retraction of her original article about me, along with an exposé detailing how Theodore had manipulated local media to attack his victims. The headline read, "How a Mercer Island Millionaire Weaponized Journalism to Silence His Critics." And Sunday, exactly 2 weeks after Kevin had first broken down in that Denny's booth and told me the truth, we walked into King County Family Court for the hearing that would determine whether my son would ever see his children again. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, the American flag hanging limply in the corner. Nothing grand or dramatic about it. Just a functional space where families came apart and occasionally came back together. Kevin sat at the plaintiff's table with Gerald, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression carefully neutral. I sat in the gallery behind him, close enough to offer support, far enough to avoid accusations of intimidation. Rachel arrived with her own attorney, a sleek woman named Diana Frost, who specialized in high-asset divorces and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Rachel herself looked diminished somehow, the confidence that had always defined her replaced by something brittle and uncertain. Her parents were notably absent. Judge Yamamoto entered at precisely 9 a.m. A small woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every lie families could tell and had stopped being impressed by any of them. We're here on the matter of Chen versus Chen, specifically Mr. Kevin Chen's petition for joint custody of the minor children Emma and Lucas Chen. She looked at Rachel's attorney. Miss Frost, your client filed an ex parte motion 2 weeks ago claiming Mr. Chen posed an imminent threat to the children's safety. I've reviewed the supporting documentation, and I have some concerns. Diana Frost stood, her posture radiating confidence. Your Honor, the documentation clearly shows. The documentation shows allegations, Ms. Frost. Allegations that have been substantially contradicted by subsequent events. Judge Yamamoto pulled out a thick folder. Since your motion was filed, Mr. Theodore Ashford, Mrs. Chen's father, has been arrested on federal charges including fraud and elder financial abuse. Mrs. Chen herself is named in a civil RICO complaint alleging systematic identity theft against her own husband, and multiple witnesses have come forward describing a pattern of manipulation and financial crimes that directly involves the people your client claimed were concerned about Mr. Chen's stability. Your Honor, my client's concerns were genuine at the time, were they? The judge's voice sharpened. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your client used this court as a weapon, in an ongoing scheme to defraud her husband and his family.
She obtained an emergency order based on claims that she knew, or should have known, were false, and then used that order to deny a father access to his children during one of the most difficult periods of his life. Rachel's attorney opened her mouth to respond, but Judge Yamamoto wasn't finished.
I've also reviewed the evidence submitted by Mr. Chen's counsel. Recordings of conversations between Mrs. Chen, her father, and various co-conspirators. Financial documents showing the systematic theft of Mr. Chen's identity.
And perhaps most damning, an email written by Mrs. Chen herself, in which she describes her marriage as a vehicle for accessing her husband's family assets. The judge looked directly at Rachel. Mrs.
Chen, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to understand that perjury in a custody proceeding carries serious consequences. Did you marry your husband with the intention of defrauding him and his father? Silence. Rachel's attorney leaned over, whispering urgently.
Rachel's face had gone pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Mrs. Chen, answer the question. I. Rachel's voice came out barely above a whisper. I was following my father's instructions. I didn't fully understand what I was participating in until.
So your answer is yes. More silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, Rachel nodded.
Judge Yamamoto sat back in her chair,
her expression unreadable. I'm going to make several rulings, and I want everyone in this courtroom to understand that these rulings are based on the evidence before me and the best interests of two children who deserve better than what the adults in their lives have
provided. She turned to Kevin.
Mr. Chen, the temporary custody order is hereby vacated. You are granted immediate access to your children, effective today. Kevin's breath caught audibly.
Furthermore, I'm granting your petition for joint legal and physical custody
on a provisional basis, pending the resolution of the divorce proceedings.
The children will reside with you for a minimum of 4 days per week, with the specific schedule to be determined by mediation. Your Honor, Diana Frost started. I'm not finished, Ms. Frost. The judge's voice could have frozen water.
Mrs. Chen, given the evidence of ongoing financial crimes in which you are implicated, I'm also ordering a full forensic audit of all accounts in your name or under your control.
Any attempt to move, hide, or dissipate marital assets will be treated as contempt of court and may result in modification of this custody arrangement. Rachel looked like she might be sick.
Finally, I'm referring this matter to the King County Prosecutor's Office for review. The use of family court to perpetuate fraud is not something I take lightly, and I believe there may be grounds for criminal charges separate from the federal investigation already underway.
Judge Yamamoto closed her folder.
Mr. Chen, you may retrieve your children from their current location this afternoon. I'm ordering Mrs. Chen to provide full cooperation with the transfer. Any interference will result in immediate sanctions. She looked at Kevin with something that might have been sympathy. Your children are lucky to have a father who fought for them.
I hope you'll help them understand that none of this was their fault. Kevin stood, his voice thick with emotion.
Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me. Thank whatever instinct made you start recording those conversations 6 months ago. Without that evidence, we might be having a very different hearing today. I waited in the hallway while Kevin went to retrieve Emma and Lucas from the Ashford estate. Gerald had offered to accompany him, but Kevin wanted to do this alone.
They're my kids, he said.
I need them to see that their father is strong enough to come get them himself. So, I sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, watching lawyers and clients flow past in an endless stream of human misery, and waited.
2 hours.
2 hours of staring at my phone, checking for updates, imagining everything that could go wrong. Rachel refusing to cooperate. The Ashfords interfering. Emma and Lucas so poisoned against their father that they wouldn't want to leave.
Then my phone buzzed with a photo. Kevin, standing in a parking lot. Emma clinging to his neck and Lucas in his arms.
All 3 of them crying. All 3 of them together. Coming home, the caption read, all of us. I stared at that photo until my vision blurred. Then I went home to prepare the guest room. The nursery I'd kept ready for 5 years, hoping for exactly this moment. They arrived at 4:47 p.m.
I heard the car in the driveway, heard the doors open and close, heard small voices I hadn't heard in person for months. Grandpa! Grandpa! Emma burst through my front door like a tiny hurricane, her arms wrapping around my legs with a force that nearly knocked me over. Behind her, Kevin carried Lucas,
who was too young to understand what had happened, but old enough to sense that something important had changed. "Hey, sweetheart." I knelt down to Emma's level, brushing hair out of her face. "I missed you so much. Mommy said you didn't want to see us anymore." Her lip trembled. "She said you were too busy and we shouldn't bother you." The words cut like razors, but I kept my voice steady. "Your mommy was wrong, Emma. I always wanted to see you. Every single day. And now we're going to see each other all the time. Okay? Grandpa's not going anywhere." She nodded, then buried her face in my shoulder. I looked up at Kevin, who was watching us with tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered, "for everything. Welcome home, son." That night, after Emma and Lucas were asleep in the nursery, the purple elephant nightlight casting gentle shadows on walls that had waited so long for this moment, Kevin and I sat on my back porch, watching. The stars emerged through the winter clouds. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we heal," I said. "Now we give those kids the stability they deserve. Now we let the lawyers and the FBI handle Theodore and Rachel while we focus on being a family. And the divorce will take time." "But you have leverage now, Kevin. Real leverage. Rachel's facing potential criminal charges. Her assets are frozen. Her father is under indictment. Whatever settlement she was hoping for, she's not going to get it." Kevin was quiet for a long moment. "I loved her, you know. Despite everything. Part of me still can't believe it was all fake." "Maybe it wasn't all fake," I said carefully. "People are complicated. Rachel did terrible things. But that doesn't mean every moment of your marriage was a lie. It just means she chose wrong when it mattered most. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to be true." I looked at my son, exhausted, broken, but still standing. "You're going to feel a lot of things over the next few months. Anger, grief, relief, guilt. All of it is valid. All of it is part of healing. The important thing is that you're not alone anymore. You have me. You have Emma and Lucas. You have people who actually love you, not for what you can give them, but for who you are." Kevin nodded slowly. "Dad." "Yeah? I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I'm sorry I let them convince me you were the problem when you were the only one trying to help." "I know, son, I know." We sat in silence after that, father and son, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the quiet sounds of children sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. The war wasn't over. Theodore's trial was months away. The divorce would drag on. The scars left by Rachel's betrayal would take years to heal, if they ever healed completely. But tonight, my grandchildren were sleeping under my roof. My son was sitting beside me, finally free of the web that had trapped him for so long. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the future looked like something worth living for. 8 months later, I stood in a federal courtroom in Seattle and watched Theodore Ashford receive his sentence. The man who'd entered my life through his daughter's calculated seduction of my son. The man who'd orchestrated the theft of my savings, the destruction of my reputation, and the systematic isolation of my grandchildren, looked nothing like the silver-haired patriarch who'd threatened me on my porch less than a year ago. Prison awaited him. The certainty of it had hollowed him out from the inside, leaving behind a shell that shuffled to the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit, his famous confidence replaced by the glazed bewilderment of someone who'd finally encountered a problem his money couldn't solve. Theodore Raymond Ashford, Judge Harrison Chen, no relation, read from his prepared statement, "You have been found guilty of 12 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of elder financial abuse, 4 counts of money laundering, and 2 counts of obstruction of justice." The evidence presented during this trial has revealed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning more than 15 years, targeting vulnerable individuals and their families for systematic financial exploitation. I listened as the judge detailed Theodore's crimes, not just against me, but against the 7 other victims who'd come forward once they saw that the great Theodore Ashford could actually fall. A retired nurse who'd lost her pension, a widower who'd trusted Theodore with his late wife's estate, a small business owner who'd been convinced to invest his life savings in a guaranteed opportunity that existed only on paper. 15 years of theft. 15 years of broken families and stolen futures. And Theodore had gotten away with all of it, until one old man decided to stop being polite. The defendant has shown no genuine remorse for his actions, Judge Chen continued.
Throughout these proceedings, he has attempted to shift blame to co-conspirators, minimize the harm caused to victims, and obstruct the investigation at every opportunity. The court finds these factors aggravating rather than mitigating. Theodore's lawyer, his fourth since the arrest, the previous 3 having withdrawn due to irreconcilable differences, shifted uncomfortably. Therefore, I am sentencing the defendant to 18 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 12 years. Additionally, the defendant is ordered to pay restitution totaling $4.7 million to his victims to be satisfied from the liquidation of his frozen assets. 18 years. Theodore would be 83 when he became eligible for release. Assuming he survived that long in a federal penitentiary, which wasn't guaranteed for a man his age who'd spent his entire life being catered to by servants and sycophants. I watched them lead him away in handcuffs, his designer shoes scuffing against the courtroom floor, his shoulders hunched against a future he never imagined possible. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. No sense of justice finally served. Just a quiet emptiness, like a wound that had finally stopped bleeding but would never fully heal. Kevin sat beside me, his hand finding mine as the courtroom began to empty. "It's over," he said. "No," I replied. "It's just beginning to end." There's a difference. Rachel's fate was decided 3 weeks later, in a much quieter proceeding that didn't make national news. She'd cooperated with prosecutors, trading testimony against her father for a reduced sentence that would see her serve 4 years in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. The deal had required her to surrender all claims to the offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the elaborate financial architecture she and Theodore had built on the bones of other people's trust. More importantly, she'd signed away primary custody of Emma and Lucas. The children would live with Kevin full-time, with Rachel permitted supervised visitation twice a month once she completed her sentence. The judge had been clear. Any violation of the terms, any attempt to manipulate the children or interfere with Kevin's parenting would result in permanent termination of her parental rights. I wasn't in the courtroom when the deal was finalized. Kevin went alone, saying he needed to face this last piece of his marriage without anyone holding his hand. He came home that evening looking older than his 34 years, but also somehow lighter, like he'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. She cried, he told me, sitting at my kitchen table while Emma and Lucas played in the backyard. When the judge read the terms, real tears, not the fake ones she used to turn on when she wanted something. He shook his head. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the email. Phase 1 complete. The way she talked about me like I was a mark, not a husband. Kevin stared at his hands. Whatever she's feeling now, she earned it. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of fear about what's coming. She built that future for herself, one lie at a time. And you? What did you build? Kevin looked up at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something in his eyes that looked like peace. A second chance, he said. With my kids, with you, with myself. He paused. I'm thinking about going back to teaching. There's an opening at a community college in Tacoma. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work, and the hours would let me be home when Emma gets out of school. Sounds perfect. It sounds ordinary. Kevin smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen from him in years. I never thought I'd want ordinary. Rachel always made it seem like ordinary was failure. Like we needed more, deserved more, should always be reaching for the next thing. He shook his head. Turns out ordinary is pretty good. Ordinary means coming home to people who love you. Ordinary means knowing exactly who you are and being okay with it. I reached across the table and gripped his shoulder. Your mother would be proud of you. You think so? I know so. Victor Mendez served 14 months in a federal facility in Oregon. His cooperation with prosecutors had earned him a significantly reduced sentence, but there were still consequences to face. The loss of his professional license, the dissolution of his firm, the permanent stain on a reputation he'd spent decades building. Rosa visited him every week. I don't know what they talked about during those visits. What words passed between a wife and the husband who'd betrayed her family for gambling debts and a bribe from a man who'd treated everyone around him like resources to be exploited. But when Victor was released, Rosa was there to pick him up.
And when I saw them together at a family dinner 6 months later, hesitant, awkward, still navigating the wreckage of trust destroyed and slowly rebuilt, I understood something I hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting.
It wasn't about pretending the wound never happened or minimizing the damage done. It was about choosing, every single day, to believe that people could change. That the worst thing someone did didn't have to be the last thing that defined them. I hadn't forgiven Victor. Not completely. Maybe I never would. But I'd stopped hating him. And that, it turned out, was enough. The money came back slowly. Theodore's assets were liquidated over the course of 18 months. The Mercer Island mansion sold at auction for $3.2 million. The investment accounts frozen and distributed to victims. The offshore holdings clawed back through international cooperation agreements that I didn't pretend to understand. My share of the restitution totaled $312,000. Not everything I'd lost, but more than I'd expected to recover. Enough to pay off the second mortgage I'd taken out to fund Kevin's down payment. Enough to fix the cracked concrete in my driveway and the leaking windows I'd ignored for years. Enough to know that my retirement wouldn't be spent eating cat food and worrying about utility bills. But the real restoration wasn't financial. It was the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through my house on Saturday mornings. It was Lucas taking his first steps in my living room, his tiny hands gripping my fingers for balance. It was Kevin cooking dinner in my kitchen, using recipes I taught him when he was barely tall enough to reach the stove. It was family. Real family. The kind that couldn't be bought or manipulated or stolen away by people who saw love as just another resource to exploit. Margot Ashford moved to Arizona 3 months after Theodore's sentencing. She sold what remained of her jewelry, liquidated her personal accounts, and disappeared into a retirement community near Scottsdale where no one knew her name or her history. I heard through Rosa, who'd maintained contact with some of the Mercer Island social circle, that Margot had stopped speaking to Rachel entirely, blaming her daughter for the family's downfall rather than acknowledging her own complicity in decades of fraud. Some people never learn. Some people would rather die alone than admit they were wrong. I tried to feel sympathy for her. This woman who'd lost her husband, her home, her social standing, everything she'd spent her life accumulating. But every time I started to soften, I remembered her voice on my porch. Actions have consequences, Dennis. She was right. They do. The first anniversary of Theodore's arrest fell on a Friday in December. Kevin suggested we mark it somehow. A dinner, maybe, or a toast to survival. But when the day arrived, none of us felt like celebrating. Victory over evil people isn't the kind of thing you commemorate with champagne and party favors. It's the kind of thing you acknowledge quietly, privately, and then move on from as quickly as possible. Instead, we did something better. We had a normal day. I woke up at 6:30, made coffee, and read the newspaper while Kevin got the kids ready for school. Emma had a spelling test she was nervous about. Lucas had discovered a passion for dinosaurs that required constant discussion of which prehistoric creatures could beat which in a fight. Grandpa, who would win? A T-Rex or a Triceratops? The Triceratops, I said without hesitation. Those horns would give the T-Rex serious problems. But the T-Rex has bigger teeth. Size isn't everything, Lucas. Sometimes, the best defense is being too tough to eat. Kevin drove the kids to school while I puttered around the house, fixing a loose cabinet hinge that had been bothering me for weeks. Small tasks, ordinary maintenance. The kind of work that keeps a home standing through storms and seasons, and all the chaos that life throws at it. When Kevin returned, he found me in the backyard, staring at the vegetable garden I'd finally replanted after 7 years of neglect. Mom's garden, he said, coming to stand beside me. Tomatoes should be ready by August. Maybe some zucchini, too, if the soil cooperates. She'd like that. Seeing it alive again. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We stood there together, father and son, watching winter sunlight play across the dark earth where Linda's flowers had once grown. Where new things were growing now, pushing up through soil that had been fallow too long. Dad? Yeah? Thank you. Kevin's voice was thick. Not just for fighting. For believing I was worth fighting for. After everything, the years I shut you out, the way I let Rachel convince me you were the problem, you never stopped. That's what fathers do. I know. He turned to look at me, and I saw Linda in his eyes, her strength, her stubbornness, her absolute refusal to abandon the people she loved.
I'm going to be that kind of father to Emma and Lucas. The kind who never gives up. The kind who fights for his family, no matter what. You already are, son. He hugged me then, a real embrace, the kind we hadn't shared since he was a teenager too cool for physical affection.
I held on longer than I probably should have, feeling his heartbeat against my chest, remembering the tiny baby I'd held in the hospital 34 years ago, and made silent promises to protect. Some promises, it turned out, took a lifetime to keep, but they were worth every moment. That evening, after dinner, after homework, after Lucas's bath and Emma's bedtime story,
Kevin and I sat on the back porch watching stars emerge through the winter clouds.
The house behind us was warm and full. Children sleeping, dishes drying in the rack, the comfortable chaos of a family that had survived the worst and emerged stronger. "What are you thinking about?" Kevin asked. "Your mother."
What she'd say if she could see us now. Probably something sarcastic about how it took us long enough to figure out what matters. I laughed. Probably. Do you ever regret it?
The fight, the public exposure, burning down the Ashfords' whole world. I considered the question seriously. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the years we lost. The relationship I should have had with you and the kids. The money that went into their pockets instead of Emma's college fund. But the fight itself." I shook my head. That was the first time in years I felt like myself. Like the man Linda married, not the broken shell I'd become after she died.
You weren't broken, Dad. I was lost. There's a difference, but from the inside it feels the same. I looked at my son.
Theodore and Rachel thought they could exploit that. They saw a grieving old man who'd give anything to feel connected to family again. And they used it. What they didn't understand is that grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous. It makes you willing to risk everything because you've already lost the thing that mattered most. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. "Is that what family is?" he asked finally. "People who make you dangerous. Family is people who make you brave. People you'd burn down the world for, and who'd burn it down right back for you." I gripped his shoulder. "You have that now, Kevin. Emma and Lucas, Rosa and her kids, me. People who love you because of who you are, not what you can give them. The real thing. The only thing that matters." We sat in silence after that, 2 generations of Chen men, survivors of a war we'd never asked to fight but had refused to lose. Behind us, the house creaked and settled in the cold. Above us, the stars burned steady and eternal. And somewhere in the darkness, the future waited, uncertain, challenging, full of possibilities we couldn't yet imagine. But we'd face it together. As a family, the real kind. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who thought they were untouchable? Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you weren't who they pretended to be? I'd love to hear your stories. And for the next story, a tale of a mother who discovered her daughter-in-law had been secretly recording her for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Click on the video to your left. Until then, remember, family isn't about blood or obligation, or what you can get from someone. Family is about who shows up when everything falls apart. Make sure you know who that is for you.